Hello, everyone. See you again in today's story. Introducing to you an ancient story, the Anunnaki 2025 Gods, Ancient Aliens. Now, please listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time before history was even a concept. Imagine, if you will, the very moment an idea first leaves the warmth of a human mind and becomes permanent, etched into stone and clay. We go into the cradle of civilization, to a place of sun-baked bricks and murky rivers, to meet the people who first wrote down the stories of gods who came from the sky. Your destination is ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. You feel the grit of dust and sand under your feet, the oppressive weight of a heat that never truly breaks, and you see the impossible silhouette of a ziggurat tearing a hole in the otherwise flat horizon. A word of warning, the water here is, let's just say, it's probiotic, in a way your 21st century stomach is spectacularly unprepared for. You probably wouldn't survive this, not for a single week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we all drift off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air that fills your lungs is thick, carrying the smells of wood smoke, livestock, and something vaguely swampy from the great river flowing nearby. This is the Fertile Crescent, a name that sounds lush and inviting on paper, but feels earned through sheer, back-breaking effort when you're standing in the middle of it. The sun, a relentless golden disk, is finally beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. You're standing on the outskirts of a city, one of the first true cities the world has ever known. Its walls are made of simple, sun-dried mud bricks, yet they rise to an imposing height. It's a testament to human ingenuity, a defiant declaration of order against the chaos of the wild plains. You take a tentative step forward, your modern sneakers feeling impossibly out of place on the packed earth of a road thousands of years old. As you enter through a grand, arched gateway, the sounds of the city wash over you. It's not the mechanical roar you're used to, but a very human cacophony. There's the bleating of goats, the haggling of merchants in a sharp, guttural language that sounds like stones tumbling downhill, the laughter of children kicking a dirt-caked ball made of bundled rags. People mill around you, their skin tanned to a deep bronze by a lifetime under this sun. They wear simple, practical garments, fringed skirts for the men, long woven dresses for the women. You instinctively check for your phone, a nervous habit, but your pockets are gone because, well, the clothes here don't have them. It seems this entire civilization has a severe and tragic pocket deficit. It's a small thing, but it makes you feel profoundly untethered. You navigate the narrow, winding streets. The houses are packed tightly together, their flat roofs providing an extra living space in the cool of the evening. The air is thick with the scent of cooking fires, a smell dominated by roasting barley, onions, and a yeasty tang of brewing beer. That's a historical fact for you. Beer was a staple of the Sumerian diet, considered a gift from the gods and safer to drink than the river water. It was thick, nutritious, and probably tasted a bit like liquid bread. The official fragrance of 3000 BCE is, apparently, strong beer and a truly aggressive amount of onions. As you wander deeper into the city's heart, you notice something incredible. Near the base of the central ziggurat, in a courtyard filled with the last light of day, a man sits cross-legged on a reed mat. He is a scribe. In his hands, he holds a small, damp pillow of clay, about the size of your palm. With a sharpened reed stylus, he presses small, wedge-shaped marks into its surface. This is it. This is the birth of writing, cuneiform, the world's first script. He isn't writing poetry or a novel. He's most likely doing his accounts, so many bushels of grain from this farmer, so many jars of oil for that temple. The birth of human history was, in essence, an invoice. Historians still argue whether the earliest Sumerian settlements, like this one, were founded by indigenous peoples who had been here for generations, or by migrants arriving from a mysterious, still undiscovered region, bringing this knowledge with them. You watch the scribe, mesmerized. The focus in his eyes, the precise, practiced movements of his hands. He is capturing reality, pinning it down, making it permanent. But then he sets aside his administrative tablet and picks up a larger one. The marks he makes now are different. He isn't just making neat rows of wedges. He's drawing. He etches the image of a man, but the man is tall, impossibly tall, with a strange horned helmet. He carves a star, then another, and then a depiction of a boat sailing not on water, but between those stars. Your breath catches in your throat. This isn't an inventory of livestock. This is something else entirely. It's a story, a myth, or maybe, just maybe, a memory, but a quirky little tidbit for you. The Sumerians used a black, tar-like substance called bitumen as a multi-purpose superglue. Harvested from natural pits in the earth, it was used as mortar for their bricks, to waterproof their reed boats, and to affix decorative stones and shells. It was the original duct tape, a magical black goo that held their world together. The scribe works until the last ray of sunlight is gone, replaced by the flickering light of a sesame oil lamp. The stars above you are now blazing in inky blackness, a brilliant, terrifying canopy undimmed by the glow of a single electric light. You look from the celestial display above to the clay tablet in the man's hands. He's etching the story of beings who came from those very stars. He gives them a name. The Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. The story is just beginning, and you are here, at the very beginning of the world, to hear it told for the first time. The shadows in the courtyard deepen, and the soft, percussive sound of the stylus pressing into wet clay is the only sound that matters. The scribe carefully sets his finished tablet on a wooden rack to dry, its message now locked in place, waiting for the sun to bake it into permanence. The story of the sky gods is now a physical object. You back away from the quiet courtyard, leaving the scholar to his flickering lamp, and melt back into the city's nocturnal labyrinth. The boisterous sounds of the day have faded, replaced by a more intimate soundscape. A dog barks in the distance, a baby cries from an unseen home, and from a larger building that seems to be a tavern, you hear the muffled sound of a stringed instrument, a lyre, perhaps, and a low, communal murmur. The Sumerians, it seems, knew how to unwind after a long day of inventing civilization. Your eyes are drawn upward, past the flat roofs of the houses, to the structure that dominates the entire city, the ziggurat. During the day, it was an imposing mountain of brick. At night, it's a terrifying black void against the star-dusted sky, a stairway to nothingness. You start walking toward it, an invisible current pulling you to the city's spiritual core. This immense, stepped pyramid is the most ambitious thing these people have ever built. Historians still argue whether the ziggurat was primarily a temple, the literal house of a city's patron god, or if it also served as an administrative hub, a grain silo, and a sophisticated astronomical observatory from which priest astronomers would track the movements of the planets and stars, the celestial bodies they believed were their gods. You stand at its base, craning your neck. There are no lights on it, no grand illuminations. It's just pure, silent, geometric power. You feel an almost primal urge to climb it, to see what the priests saw from the top, but the massive staircase looks forbiddingly steep, and you get the distinct feeling that uninvited guests will be dealt with rather permanently. Turning away from the silent mountain of clay, you meander through a residential quarter. The houses are so close together that you could probably reach out and shake hands with your neighbor from your rooftop, assuming you both had excellent balance and a casual disregard for personal safety. The homes are functional, built around a central, open-air courtyard to provide a sliver of private outdoor space. There are no windows facing the street, which gives the alleyways a closed-in, secretive feel. You peer into a doorway, shielded by a simple reed mat. Inside, a family sleeps on woven mats on the floor. Their possessions are few. Some pottery jars, a small clay oven in the corner, a grinding stone for grain. Life is simple, communal, and lived mostly in public or on the roof. Privacy, like pockets, seems to be a luxury they haven't gotten around to inventing yet. It's in this environment of brilliant, gritty simplicity that you find evidence of their true genius. You stumble upon a craftsman's workshop, left open to the night air. And there, leaning against a wall, is a solid wooden wheel. It's not on a war chariot. It's a simple, functional disc, probably for a small cart to haul barley from the fields. It's one of the most important inventions in human history, sitting right there like a piece of discarded junk. Nearby is a potter's station, a lump of wet clay, sitting on a smaller, horizontal wheel. With this device, a single potter could produce perfectly symmetrical jars and bowls at a speed that would have been unimaginable just a generation earlier. This is the Sumerian way, profound, world-altering innovation born from practical, everyday needs. And it's not just the wheel. It was here, in these dusty cities, that humanity first developed organized agriculture with irrigation canals, the 60-second minute, the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, and written laws. Speaking of laws, the Sumerians were obsessed with justice. Before the famous Code of Hammurabi, there was the Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest legal documents ever discovered. And it contained some absolute gems. For example, if a man was accused of sorcery, he had to undergo the river ordeal, basically being thrown into the river. If the river proved him innocent, he survived. The accuser had to pay him 3 shekels of silver. It's a fascinating legal system, part pragmatic, part a high-stakes swimming competition. This quirky tidbit reveals a society deeply concerned with order and fairness, yet one that still saw the hand of the divine in the flow of a river or the outcome of a trial by water. The thought of the river draws you toward the edge of the city. You can hear it now, low, constant whisper. You stand on the bank of the Euphrates, a wide, dark ribbon under the moonlight. This river, along with its twin, the Tigris, is everything. It's the source of the clay for their bricks and tablets, the water for their crops, the fish for their meals, and the silt that makes this whole arid region fertile. But it is also a monster. The floods here were not gentle and predictable like the Niles in Egypt. They were violent, sudden, and catastrophic, capable of washing away an entire city in a single terrifying night. Living here meant accepting that your entire world, everything you had built, could be erased at a moment's notice by a force of nature you could neither predict nor control. This is the key to understanding the Sumerian mind and why their stories of the Anunnaki took the shape they did. When your life is governed by such immense and capricious powers, a sun that can bake the earth into a cracked wasteland, a river that can give life or swallow it whole, it's only natural to imagine that the world is controlled by equally immense and capricious beings. Their gods weren't gentle, benevolent spirits. They were forces of nature, superpowered beings with their own dramas, their own jealousies, and their own agendas. The Sumerians didn't have to look to the stars for gods who were terrifyingly powerful and morally ambiguous. They just had to look at the river flowing silently in front of you. You watch the water churn, and you realize that for them, the line between God, nature, and alien was never a line at all. It was just reality. You leave the menacing whisper of the Euphrates behind, the ever-present threat of flood a low thrum in your subconscious. The city is now almost completely silent, the last of the tavern-goers having stumbled home. The moonlight is your only guide as you drift back toward the ziggurat, that silent, colossal monument that seems to be the source of all the city's spiritual gravity. It is here, in the shadow of this man-made mountain, that you can finally begin to piece together the divine drama that governed the lives of these people. You sit on the cool steps of a lesser temple, close your eyes, and let the stories etched on those thousands of drying clay tablets fill your mind. You imagine yourself as a young Sumerian, listening to a priest tell these tales in a hushed, reverent tone. The first thing you learn is that the cosmos is not empty, nor is it ruled by a single, all-powerful being. It is a kingdom, a celestial bureaucracy teeming with gods, demigods, and a host of lesser spirits. At the very top, there's an ancient, distant creator god named Anu, the Lord of the Firmament. He's like the chairman of the board of a cosmic corporation. His name is on the letterhead, but he's too remote and too important to be bothered with the day-to-day operations of planet Earth. His abode is in the heavens, in a place the Sumerians called Anna, the house of heaven. The real power, the gods who get their hands dirty, are his children. The two most important are the half-brothers Enlil and Enki, and their rivalry is the engine that drives much of Sumerian mythology. Enlil is the lord of the command. He's the firstborn, the heir apparent, the god of wind, air, and storms. He's stern, powerful, and often short-tempered. If the gods were a family on a road trip, Enlil is the dad who is gripping the steering wheel, shouting that he will absolutely turn this chariot around if the kids in the back don't stop bickering. He's the one who was granted dominion over the earth, and he takes his job very, very seriously. He values order, discipline, and expects his decrees to be followed without question. It's Enlil who gets enraged by humanity's noise and clamor, Enlil who sends plagues and famines, and ultimately, Enlil who will decide to wipe the slate clean with a great flood. Then there is his half-brother, Enki. Oh, Enki. He is the clever one, the trickster, the god of water, knowledge, and creation. His name means Lord of the Earth, which is a bit of an ironic title since Enlil is technically the boss of this planet. This is a source of eternal tension between them. While Enlil is the rigid commander, Enki is the brilliant, maverick scientist. He's the god of wisdom, magic, and invention. He resides in the Abzu, the freshwater abyss deep within the earth, a realm of pure creative potential. Enki is crafty, curious, and most importantly, often sympathetic to the plight of his greatest creation, humankind. While Enlil sees humanity as a noisy, disposable workforce, Enki is more like a proud, if sometimes exasperated, father. He's the one who leaks divine secrets, who teaches humanity the arts of civilization, and who ultimately finds a way to save a chosen few from his brother's wrath. Together, Enlil and Enki are part of the Supreme Council, the seven who decree fate. This group forms the core of the Anunnaki leadership. Alongside Anu, Enlil, and Enki, you have their sister, Ninhursag. She is the great mother goddess, the goddess of fertility, and the earth itself. She is the cosmic matriarch, working alongside Enki in the biological engineering projects that will eventually lead to humanity. Then there's Nana, the god of the moon, who illuminates the darkness and measures the passing of time. His son is Utu, the glorious god of the sun and of justice, who sees all that happens on earth during the day. And finally, there is the most complex and compelling of them all, Inanna, the goddess of love, beauty, sex, desire, and just to keep things interesting, war. She is Nana's daughter and Utu's twin sister, a divine force of pure, untamable passion. She is no quiet, demure goddess. She is ambitious, ferocious, and utterly captivating. A historical fact for you. The Sumerians practiced a form of astronomy that was deeply intertwined with their religion. The seven gods we've just met were each associated with one of the seven celestial bodies they could see with the naked eye: the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. For them, watching the planets wander across the night sky wasn't just astronomy. It was watching the gods travel through their celestial kingdoms. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians viewed these gods as literal beings who resided on these planets, or the planets were merely symbolic representations of the gods' power and influence. And here's a quirky tidbit. Mesopotamian demons, unlike their later Christian counterparts, weren't necessarily evil. They were just chaotic. Spirits like Pazuzu, a fearsome creature with a canine face, eagle wings, and a scorpion's tail, was the demon of the destructive southwest wind. While terrifying, he was also paradoxically invoked on protective amulets to ward off his rival, the malevolent goddess Lamashtu, who preyed on pregnant women and infants. So you could use one demon to fight another, like a celestial version of rock, paper, scissors, but with more screaming and talents. It's cosmic pest control. So here you sit, in the silent heart of this ancient city, and you finally understand the cosmic stage. You have the distant chairman, Anu. You have the two rival brothers, Enlil, the stern manager of Earth, and Enki, the brilliant rebellious head of R&D. You have Ninhursag, the head of biology, Nana and Utu in charge of time and observation, and Inanna, the dangerously charismatic head of, well, human resources in a very, very literal sense. This is the pantheon that ruled Sumer. These are the Anunnaki, and as you will soon discover, their family squabbles, their corporate directives, and their scientific experiments are about to create a mess of truly biblical proportions. The night is deep, but the real story is just beginning to dawn. The moon, Nana in his celestial bark, has sailed across the zenith of the sky and begins its slow descent toward the western horizon. The air has grown cooler, carrying a hint of morning dew. You are still wrapped in the silence of the pre-dawn city, but your mind is buzzing with a cosmic hierarchy you've just learned. It's one thing to know the names of the gods, the organizational chart of the heavens. It's another thing entirely to understand where they and everything else came from. To do that, you have to go back, not just to the beginning of this city, but to the beginning of time itself. You let your mind drift again, this time seeking not the story of the city, but the story of the universe. The story comes to you in fragments of a great epic, one that would later be compiled by Babylonian scribes into the Enuma Elish, the definitive Mesopotamian creation story. It doesn't start with a gentle, commanding voice saying, "Let there be light." It starts with a slurry, a formless, watery, chaotic void. There is only Apsu, the primordial being of fresh water, and his consort Tiamat, the monstrous, glittering embodiment of the salt sea. They exist in a state of inert, commingling potential. But within their watery bodies, new things begin to stir. Younger gods are born, noisy and energetic, disrupting the perfect, silent slumber of their ancient parents. The celestial kids are, to put it mildly, rambunctious. They throw cosmic parties, invent loud new forms of energy, and generally make a nuisance of themselves. Apsu, the ancient father, is driven to distraction by their ceaseless activity. He confides in his vizier, "Their ways have become grievous to me. By day I find no relief, nor repose by night. I will destroy, I will wreck their ways, that quiet may be restored." It's the first ever divine noise complaint. But before Apsu can act on his grumpy, genocidal impulse, the clever god Enki, yes, our Enki, even then the master of wits, learns of the plot. He doesn't face Apsu in open battle. Instead, he casts a powerful sleeping spell on the ancient god, lulling him into a deep slumber, and then dispatches him. From Apsu's corpse, Enki builds his famous domain, the Abzu, the home of fresh water and wisdom. This act of primordial patricide is the opening shot in a cosmic war. Tiamat, the great salt sea mother, is at first ambivalent, but she is slowly roused to a fury, goaded by the other young gods who accuse her of not avenging her husband. Her grief curdles into a universe-ending rage. She is no longer just the mother of gods. She becomes a monstrous dragon of chaos. She brings forth a host of horrifying monsters to be her army, giant serpents, mad dogs, scorpion men, and raging storm demons. The younger gods, including our core Anunnaki group, are terrified. They are powerless against the fury of their great-great-great-great-grandmother. Who can possibly stand against the primordial sea monster and her legion of horrors? A new champion emerges, Marduk. In later Babylonian traditions, Marduk, who is Enki's son, steps forward. In earlier Sumerian versions, this role is often played by Enlil, the god of the storm. For now, let's stick with the classic Babylonian tale. Marduk is young, ambitious, and brimming with power. He makes a deal with the terrified Anunnaki council. "If I, your avenger, am to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives," he proclaims, "you must assemble and proclaim my destiny supreme. Let my word, instead of yours, determine the fates." Desperate, they agree. They grant him supreme authority, effectively promoting him to the new CEO of the divine corporation. Marduk arms himself for the ultimate battle. He carries a bow, a mace, and a net to ensnare the great dragon. Most importantly, he fills his body with a blazing flame and commands the four winds to be his allies. He rides his storm chariot into the heart of the cosmos to confront Tiamat. The confrontation is epic. She opens her monstrous mouth to consume him, but Marduk is ready. He unleashes the Mhulu, the evil wind, and sends it howling into her maw, so she cannot close her jaws. Her belly is distended, and in that moment of vulnerability, Marduk fires an arrow that pierces her heart, extinguishing her life. The war is over. But creation has just begun. Marduk, standing victorious over the colossal dead body of Tiamat, becomes a cosmic butcher. He splits her corpse in two, like a giant clamshell. From her upper half, he crafts the sky, complete with the constellations and the stations for the great gods. From her lower half, he fashions the earth. Her weeping eyes become the source of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Her tail becomes a celestial bolt, locking the new sky into place. It's a vision of the universe that is breathtakingly violent and recycled. The world you're standing in is, according to this story, literally made from the dismembered body of a dead dragon goddess. It's a sobering thought. No wonder they believed the world was a dangerous and chaotic place. A mainstream historical fact, the Enuma Elish was not just a story. It was a central part of the Akitu festival, the Babylonian New Year celebration. For 11 days, the city of Babylon would erupt in a series of rituals that reenacted this cosmic battle, culminating in the king playing the role of Marduk, thus reaffirming his divine right to rule and ensuring the stability of the cosmos for another year. It was part religious ceremony, part political theater. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Mesopotamian traditions, the tablets of destiny, which held the supreme power to decree fate, were not some ethereal concept but a physical object, possibly a cuneiform tablet made of lapis lazuli. During her rebellion, Tiamat gave this tablet to her new champion, a monstrous god named Kingu. After Marduk defeated Tiamat, he seized the tablet from Kingu, cementing his own authority. It's a wonderful bit of bureaucratic mythology. The most powerful object in the universe is essentially a legal document. Now you understand. The universe wasn't planned. It was the result of a bloody family feud, an act of cosmic pest control that got way out of hand. The Anunnaki gods you've met are not the original creators. They are the inheritors of a world born from violence and chaos. They live in a recycled universe. And this, perhaps, explains their often cavalier attitude toward life and death. When your very reality is built upon the corpse of your ancestor, you might develop a rather unsentimental worldview. The first hints of dawn are now touching the top of the ziggurat, turning the black silhouette into a dark, earthy red. A new day is coming to the city, a day that exists only because a storm god once slew a dragon. And the Anunnaki, now masters of this strange new world, had a problem. The universe was built, but who was going to do the work? The sun, the great god Utu, begins its ascent, casting long, sharp shadows across the city. The first stirrings of life return to the streets as people emerge from their homes to greet the new day. The air is crisp and clean, but your mind is still caught in the celestial drama, in the world of the gods. You've met the divine council, you've witnessed the violent birth of the cosmos. Now you're drawn to the story of one goddess in particular, the most vibrant, ambitious, and terrifying of them all, Inanna. As the sun god Utu is her twin brother, it feels appropriate to contemplate her story at the break of dawn. Inanna is the queen of heaven, the goddess of the morning and evening star Venus. She is a goddess of profound dualities. She presides over the passion of the bedroom and the carnage of the battlefield. She can inspire the most tender love and the most savage bloodlust. She is, to put it in modern terms, a drama queen of cosmic proportions, and her most famous story is a chilling testament to her ambition and her nerve. It's the tale of her descent into the underworld, a realm known as Kur or Irkalla. The story begins with Inanna, in her full glory, deciding to abandon her temples in the 7 great cities of Sumer and travel to the land of the dead. Why? The poem never explicitly says. Is she trying to conquer the underworld, just as she has conquered the heavens? Is she going to attend the funeral rites of her brother-in-law? The bull of heaven? Or is she simply seeking to expand her own power and knowledge? Whatever the reason, it's a bold and reckless move. The underworld is the domain of her elder sister, the fearsome Ereshkigal, queen of the great below, and the two sisters have a rivalry that makes Enlil and Enki's bickering look like a minor disagreement over chariot parking. Inanna prepares meticulously for her journey. She adorns herself with the 7 the divine powers that signify her godhood. She wears the crown of the steppe on her head, lapis lazuli beads around her neck, a golden ring on her hand, a breastplate called Come Man Come on her chest, and is draped in the royal robe. These are not just accessories. They are the source of her divine authority. Fully armed and fabulous, she arrives at the outer gates of the underworld and demands entry. The gatekeeper, a grim being named Neti, is skeptical. He asks who she is and why she's here. Inanna delivers a thunderous threat. If you do not open the gate for me to come in, I will smash the door. I will shatter the bolt. I will smash the doorposts. I will move the doors. I will raise up the dead, and they will eat the living. The dead will outnumber the living. This is the first recorded instance of a zombie apocalypse threat, and it's delivered by a goddess in full battle glamour. Ereshkigal, from her throne deep within, is enraged by her sister's audacity, but grudgingly allows her to enter on one condition. At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, Inanna must remove one of her divine garments, one of her me. So begins her slow, humiliating procession into the depths. At the first gate, her crown is taken. At the second, her lapis beads. At the third, her breastplate. Gate by gate, she is stripped of her power and her identity. By the time she passes through the 7th and final gate, she is naked, bowed low, and powerless. She is brought before the throne of Ereshkigal. Her sister, the grim queen of dust and silence, fixes her with the eye of death. The Anunnaki judges of the underworld, a separate, chthonic branch of the family, render their verdict against her. Ereshkigal speaks the word of wrath, utters the cry of guilt, and Inanna, the brilliant queen of heaven, is turned into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat left to hang on a hook. Above, in the world of the living, time passes. 3 days and 3 nights go by. Inanna does not return. Her faithful vizier, Ninshubber, who was given instructions by Inanna before she left, begins to panic. As planned, she goes to the great gods for help. She begs Enlil, the high commander, but he refuses, saying Inanna brought this on herself by meddling in affairs that were not her concern. She goes to the moon god Nanna, Inanna's own father, but he too refuses to interfere. A historical fact. In Sumerian culture, the lines between different gods' jurisdictions were taken very seriously. The underworld was a sealed-off kingdom with its own inviolable rules, and even powerful gods like Enlil were reluctant to intervene, much like one modern government department refusing to meddle in the affairs of another. Desperate, Ninshubber goes to the last hope, the clever god Enki. And Enki, ever the creative problem solver, and the one with a soft spot for cosmic drama, agrees to help. He doesn't go himself, of course. That would be far too direct. Instead, he scrapes the dirt from under his fingernails and fashions 2 tiny, asexual beings, the Kurgara and the Galadar. They are neither male nor female, and because of this, they can slip past the sentinels of the underworld unnoticed. He gives them the food of life and the water of life and send them down to the throne of Ereshkigal. The 2 creatures arrive to find the queen of the underworld in agony, moaning and groaning as if in childbirth, suffering for the death of her sister. In a brilliant display of divine empathy, the 2 little beings begin to moan and groan with her. When she cries, "Oh, my heart," they cry, "Oh, your heart." When she wails, "Oh, my liver," they wail, "Oh, your liver." Ereshkigal is so taken aback by this display of sympathy, the first she has ever known in her grim kingdom, that she offers them a gift. They refuse the rivers of water and fields of grain she offers. Instead, they ask only for the corpse hanging on the hook. Ereshkigal agrees. They sprinkle the body with the food and water of life, and Inanna is resurrected. But no one, not even a goddess, leaves the underworld for free. The Gala, the bailiffs of the underworld, are sent to escort her back and to find a substitute to take her place. This is a scholarly debate. What is the true nature of the Gala? Are they demons, or are they more like divine police officers, simply enforcing the immutable laws of the cosmos? Inanna ascends back to the light, but she is pursued by these ghoulish debt collectors. She must choose a replacement. They try to take her vizier Ninshubber, but Inanna refuses. They try to take her sons, but she refuses. Finally, she arrives back at her city of Uruk and sees her husband, the shepherd king Demused, sitting on her throne, dressed in fine clothes, not mourning her at all. In a flash of fury, Inanna chooses him. She fixes him with the eye of death, just as Ereshkigal did to her, and says to the Gala, take him away. And so Demused is dragged down into the underworld to take her place. A quirky tidbit, Demused's fate became the basis for a whole cycle of seasonal myths. In some versions, his loving sister Jeshtanana volunteers to take his place for half the year. So for 6 months, Demused is in the underworld winter, and for 6 months, he returns to the world above while his sister takes his place summer. This myth explained the dying and rebirth of vegetation throughout the year. The sun is now fully above the horizon. The story of Inanna's terrifying journey is a stark reminder. These gods are not gentle shepherds. They are beings of immense power, pride, and passion. They make mistakes, they hold grudges, and they will sacrifice anyone, even their own husband, to save themselves. You shiver despite the growing warmth of the morning. The Anunnaki are not simple gods. They are a family with all the love, betrayal, and savage score-settling that implies. The city of Uruk is now fully awake. The sun Utu, whom Inanna left to her grim fate for a time, now bathes the mud-brick walls in a warm, golden light. The air buzzes with the commerce and chatter of a new day. You've been immersed in the ancient world, in the epics of creation and the terrifying journeys of the gods. The stories feel both epic and deeply, psychologically real. They are the software that runs this entire civilization. But now, it's time to take a great leap forward, to leave the dusty streets of Mesopotamia and travel thousands of years into the future, into a world of libraries, lecture halls, and the hum of fluorescent lights. The story of the Anunnaki does not end here, baked in clay. It goes dormant, waiting for a new kind of scribe to rediscover it. You find yourself in the mid-20th century. The world is a place of dizzying change, of Cold War anxieties, space race ambitions, and a burgeoning counterculture that questions every established truth. It's in this fertile ground of skepticism and wonder that a man named Zacharias Sitchin begins his life's work. Sitchin was born in Azerbaijan, raised in Palestine, and educated in London. He was an executive in the shipping industry, journalist, and most importantly, a scholar of breathtaking ambition. He was one of only a few hundred people in the world who could read and understand Sumerian cuneiform. He wasn't a tenured university professor or a field archaeologist. He was an outsider, a passionate amateur in the truest sense of the word, and this outsider status would be both his greatest strength and his most glaring weakness. Imagine Sitchin in a vast, silent library, perhaps the British Museum, surrounded by stacks of books on ancient history and linguistics. He's poring over translations of the same text you've just been experiencing, the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Lament for Uar, the story of Inanna's descent. He reads the same stories of Anu, Enlil, and Enki. He sees the same tales of cosmic battles, divine decrees, and gods who meddle in the affairs of mortals. But Sitchin sees something different. Where mainstream academia, the Egyptologist, the Assyriologist, the Sumerologist, saw mythology, he saw memory. Where they saw a religious allegory, he saw a historical record. Where they saw gods, he saw extraterrestrials. Sitchin's central paradigm-shifting idea was this: the Anunnaki were not gods. Not in the supernatural sense. They were flesh and blood beings, a technologically advanced humanoid species from another planet in our own solar system. He proposed that the Sumerian myths were not myths at all, but garbled, awestruck accounts of real events witnessed by our primitive ancestors. The heavens they came from wasn't a spiritual plane. It was literally the sky. Their chariots of fire were spacecraft. Their divine powers were advanced technologies that our ancestors could only interpret as magic. He took the stories literally, and in doing so, he reframed the entire narrative of human origins. In 1976, he published his first and most famous book, The 12th Planet. The title itself was a bombshell. He argued that the Sumerians knew our solar system in incredible detail. They knew about the planets out to Saturn, which is a mainstream historical fact. Sumerian astronomical texts list the planets and their celestial positions with remarkable accuracy for a civilization without telescopes. But Sitchin claimed they knew more. He pointed to cylinder seals like the famous VA-243 seal, which appears to show the Sun surrounded by 11 orbiting bodies. Since we only know of 9 planets at the time, plus our Sun and Moon, that adds up to 11. Sitchin asked, what was the 12th? He claimed the Sumerians knew of an undiscovered planet in our solar system, a planet they called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. This wasn't just a simple retelling of old stories. Sitchin began to construct a vast, cohesive timeline. He wasn't just a translator. He was a detective, piecing together clues from dozens of disparate texts. He cross-referenced Sumerian myths with biblical stories, Akkadian epics, and Babylonian star charts. He argued that the biblical story of the Nephilim, the sons of God, who interbred with the daughters of men in the book of Genesis, was a direct echo of the Anunnaki's time on Earth. The word Anunnaki itself, which mainstream scholars translated as princely offspring or those of royal blood, Sitchin translated with stark literalness, those who from heaven to earth came. It's a small linguistic shift, but it changes everything. Historians still argue whether Sitchin's work represents a brilliant, intuitive leap of interdisciplinary synthesis or a catastrophic misreading of the source material. Mainstream scholars overwhelmingly favor the latter. They accuse him of parallelomania, the tendency to see connections and parallels where none exist. They argue that his translations are often forced and that he cherry-picks his evidence, ignoring tablets that contradict his narrative while highlighting those that seem to support it. One of the biggest academic gripes is that he treats myths from different cities, different time periods, and even different cultures, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, as if they are all part of one single, unified canon, which they most certainly were not. It's a bit like taking a line from Shakespeare, a lyric from a Taylor Swift song, and a quote from a Marvel movie and claiming they're all part of the same historical document. But to his millions of readers, Sitchin was a revelation. He was a scholarly figure who confirmed a growing suspicion, a feeling that we had been lied to, that the official story of our past was incomplete. He wrote with an air of absolute authority, citing ancient texts and obscure cylinder seals, giving his extraordinary claims a veneer of academic rigor. It was intoxicating. It was a story grander, more exciting, and, in a strange way, more logical than the tales of ethereal gods and magical creation. A quirky tidbit from this era, the 1970s saw a massive explosion of interest in what became known as the ancient astronaut theory. Sitchin was its most scholarly proponent, but the idea was popularized by Erich von Daniken's 1968 blockbuster, Chariots of the Gods. Von Daniken's approach was less about translating texts and more about pointing at weird things, the Nazca lines in Peru, the giant stone heads of Easter Island, the pyramids of Egypt, and asking, how could ancient people possibly have built this? It must have been aliens. It was a global phenomenon. You couldn't turn on a TV without seeing a documentary with dramatic music, panning shots of ancient ruins, and a narrator asking provocative questions. Sitchin provided the textual, historical backbone that von Daniken's more speculative work lacked, so you stand now in the 20th century, having seen the stories of the Anunnaki reborn. They are no longer the capricious, passionate gods of Sumer. They have been transformed, rebranded by Zecharia Sitchin into scientific explorers, cosmic miners, and genetic engineers, The world of myth has collided with the world of science fiction. The stage is now set for a new version of the story, a version that will explain not just where the gods came from, but why they came here in the first place. And the reason, according to Sitchin, was not divine will. It was desperation. You've left the hushed libraries and the contentious academic debates of the 20th century behind, carrying Zacharias Sitchin's radical new blueprint of history in your mind. The Anunnaki are no longer mythological figures. They are now astronauts, explorers from a world beyond our own. But where exactly is that world? Sitchin's entire theory hinges on a single audacious claim: the existence of a hidden member of our solar system. You drift out of Earth's atmosphere, past our familiar moon, past the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, and into the cold, silent darkness of deep space to get a better look. According to Sitchin's interpretation of the ancient texts, this undiscovered world, Nibiru, is the true home of the Anunnaki. It is the 12th member of our solar family, counting the sun, the moon, and the 9 planets known in the 20th century. But Nibiru is not like the other planets. It doesn't follow the neat, nearly circular path of Earth or Jupiter. Instead, it travels on a vast, highly elliptical orbit like a cosmic boomerang. For most of its journey, it is lost in the frozen depths of space, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. But once every 3,600 years, its immense orbit brings it swinging back into the inner solar system, crossing the plane of the other planets between Mars and Jupiter. This 3,600-year period, Sitchin claimed, was the Sumerian unit of measurement known as a shar, a number that appears frequently in their epic tales and king lists. To build this incredible theory, Sitchin returned to the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic you witnessed earlier. Remember the violent cosmic battle between the young god Marduk and the great dragon Tiamat? Sitchin read this not as a mythological allegory, but as a surprisingly accurate account of celestial mechanics, a story of planetary collision. In his version, Nibiru is Marduk. As this rogue planet, a large newcomer, first entered our young solar system billions of years ago, its path brought it into a catastrophic encounter with an ancient water-bearing planet that the Sumerians called Tiamat. In the first pass, Nibiru's moons, the winds that Marduk armed himself with, smashed into Tiamat, cracking the planet. On its second orbit, Nibiru itself struck the wounded Tiamat directly, shattering her into 2 pieces. One half of Tiamat was pulverized into what Sitchin claimed is now the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The other, larger half, wounded and trailing water, was knocked into a new orbit by the force of the collision, eventually coalescing into the planet we now call Earth. Tiamat's primary moon, Kingu, remember him, the one who was given the Tablet of Destinies, was captured by the gravity of this new Earth and became our moon. In this single, elegant, and violent narrative, Sitchin explained the origin of Earth, the moon, and the asteroid belt, all while reinterpreting the most sacred Babylonian myth. It was, if nothing else, an act of spectacular intellectual audacity. This new planet, Earth, retained Tiamat's most precious resource, water, and it carried the seed of life from the collision with the life-bearing Nibiru. Life on Earth, in Sitchin's view, didn't arise independently. It was a direct consequence of this ancient cosmic smash-up. So our own planet is the broken half of a much older, larger world, and our DNA contains a fragment of an alien genesis. It's a powerful and strangely humbling idea. The Anunnaki, the inhabitants of Nibiru, now had a problem. Their home world was a planet in crisis. Sitchin theorized that Nibiru's long, elliptical orbit took it so far from the sun that it was losing its internal heat. Its atmosphere, the very thing that made life possible, was eroding and dissipating into space with each pass through the cold outer darkness. Their scientists came up with a desperate, high-tech solution. They needed to see the upper layers of their atmosphere with fine particles of gold. This shimmering metallic shield would reflect the planet's own heat back inward, like a giant golden thermal blanket, stabilizing their climate and saving their world from becoming a frozen wasteland. It was a planetary-scale geoengineering project born of sheer desperation. There was just one problem. they were running out of gold. Nibiru, for all its advanced technology, was geologically poor in the one metal they needed most. So their astronomers scanned the heavens, looking for a source. And they found one. It was the broken remnant of Tiamat, the young waterlogged planet now called Earth. Their old celestial enemy was rich in the very resource they needed to survive. A mainstream historical fact: the idea of a large, undiscovered planet in our solar system is not, in itself, fringe science. For over a century, astronomers have noted gravitational anomalies in the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, suggesting that something big and unseen is lurking in the outer darkness. This hypothetical world was famously dubbed Planet X. The search for Planet X led to the discovery of Pluto in 1930, but Pluto was too small to account for the discrepancies. The hunt continues to this day, though modern astronomers are looking in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond where Sitchin placed Nibiru's crossing. A quirky tidbit: Sitchin wasn't the only one to propose a catastrophic cosmic collision theory. In the 1950s, a controversial psychiatrist named Immanuel Velikovsky published a book called Worlds in Collision, where he argued that the planet Venus was originally a comet ejected from Jupiter, and that its near misses with Earth caused the biblical plagues of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea. Velikovsky's work was widely condemned by the scientific community, but became a massive bestseller, proving there's a huge public appetite for theories that blend ancient texts with cosmic catastrophe. He and Sitchin were fellow travelers in the world of radical historical revisionism, though they disagreed fiercely on the details. Historians still argue whether the Sumerian name Nibiru referred to a specific, undiscovered planet, or if it was a more general astronomical term. In many mainstream translations of Babylonian texts, Nibiru is not a planet at all, but a term for the planet Jupiter in a specific position, or sometimes Mercury. It's also used to mean a crossing point or ferry, referring to the zenith of the sky, the point where the sun crosses the celestial meridian. Sitchin's entire theory rests on his specific interpretation of this one ambiguous word. You float in the blackness, looking at the familiar, swirling blue marble of Earth. According to this new story, it's not just your home. It's a cosmic crime scene. And it's a treasure chest. The Anunnaki weren't coming as conquerors or gods, at least not at first. They were coming as miners, on a desperate, long-shot expedition to a hostile world. Their mission: to extract the one substance that could save their own. The stage is set for a planetary-scale gold rush, and the Nibrans are about to get their hands very, very dirty. You're no longer floating in the cold vacuum of space. You are plummeting through Earth's atmosphere, a passenger on an invisible Anunnaki landing craft. The year, according to Sitchin's meticulous, if speculative, timeline, is approximately 445,000 BCE. The world below you is not the world, you know. The continents are vaguely familiar, but vast ice sheets still cover much of the northern hemisphere. This is a prehistoric Earth, a world of saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, and small scattered tribes of early hominids who are not yet human. The ship screams through the sky, a fiery chariot heralding the arrival of the new gods, and splashes down, not in the ocean, but in the marshy wetlands at the head of the Persian Gulf. The hatch opens, and the first Anunnaki steps out onto Earth. The leader of this first expedition is none other than Enki, the brilliant scientist and engineer. It makes perfect sense. This isn't a military campaign. It's a high-stakes geological survey and mining operation. You need your best technical mind in charge. A small, elite crew of 50 Anunnaki disembarks with him. They are tall, powerful beings, described in the text as having a dazzling or terrifying radiance. Sitchin theorized this could be a memory of their reflective spacesuits, or simply the awe our ancestors felt in their presence. Their first task is to establish a base of operations. They name their first settlement Eridu, which Sitchin translates as home in the far away. It's a beautifully poetic and lonely name for the first alien outpost on Earth. From Eridu, Enki begins the monumental task of surveying the land, analyzing the geology, and finding the most promising locations for gold. The texts describe him building a great house, aligning it with the stars, and exploring the marshlands. But Sitchin saw this differently. Enki wasn't building a vacation home. He was setting up a command center, a mission control for a planet-wide industrial operation. The initial plan is to extract gold from the waters of the Persian Gulf. It's a logical first step. Sifting gold from water is technologically easier than hard rock mining. They build sophisticated machinery, filtration systems that our primitive ancestors could only describe as magical. But the yields are disappointingly low. There's gold in the water, yes, but not enough. Not nearly enough to save Nibiru. The pressure from the home planet is immense. The 3,600-year clock is ticking. A new plan is needed. Enki, the master geologist, directs his teams to survey the continents. Their aerial craft, the sky chariots of myth, scan the globe, and they find the motherlode. Not in Mesopotamia, but deep in southeastern Africa, in a region that will one day be known as Zimbabwe and South Africa. The veins of gold here are rich, plentiful, and waiting to be mined. This is the jackpot. So, the focus of the Anunnaki mission shifts. Enlil, the commander and Enki's half-brother, arrives on Earth to take overall charge of the operation. While Enki remains the head of science and oversees the African mining, Enlil establishes a new command center in the heart of Mesopotamia, a city called Nippur. This becomes the mission's logistical and administrative hub. They build other specialized cities, a spaceport at Sapar, a medical center at Shurapak. They are creating a colonial infrastructure, a network of interconnected bases designed for one purpose: to get gold out of the ground in Africa, transport it to Mesopotamia for processing, and then launch the refined metal into orbit to be picked up by transport ships heading back to Nibiru. This is Sitchin's grand reinterpretation of the Sumerian cities. They weren't just random settlements. They were cogs in a vast industrial machine. A mainstream historical fact. Modern archaeology has confirmed that southern Africa was indeed a site of extensive and surprisingly ancient mining activity. And Ngwenya mine in Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, archaeologists have found evidence of hematite mining dating back at least 43,000 years. While mainstream science says this was for cosmetic ochre used by early humans, ancient astronaut theorists point to these mines as proof of the Anunnaki operation. They argue the timeline goes back much, much further. The work in the African mines, a place the Sumerians called the Abzu, a name Sitchin reinterpreted from Enki's watery domain to mean the deep source of minerals, is brutal. For thousands upon thousands of years, the rank-and-file Anunnaki astronauts toil in the dark, dangerous tunnels. They are a long way from home, working in a hostile environment on a primitive planet. Their tour of duty is long, the labor is backbreaking, and their morale begins to plummet. They signed up for space exploration, not to be cosmic coal miners. Resentment begins to brew against the leadership, particularly against the stern commander Enlil. Historians still argue about the true meaning of the word Abzu. For most Sumerologists, it is unequivocally the mythological freshwater ocean that lies beneath the earth, the source of all springs and rivers, and the sacred domain of the god Enki. Sitchin's interpretation of it as the physical location of the African mines is one of his most audacious and controversial linguistic leaps. He justifies it by pointing to texts where Enki is called Lord of the Mines, and by linking the Sumerian word for gold, Ku.gi, to a land south of Egypt. A quirky tidbit that fits this narrative: ancient cultures all over the world, not just in the Middle East, were obsessed with gold. The Egyptians, the Incas, the Aztecs, they all prized gold above almost any other substance. But they didn't use it for currency or tools. They used it for sacred objects, for decorating temples and sarcophagi, for things associated with the gods and the afterlife. Sitchin's supporters ask, why? Why this universal obsession with a soft, impractical metal? They argue it's a cargo cult memory. Our ancestors saw how much the gods valued gold, and we mimic their reverence for it without understanding the technological reason behind it. We revered gold because they revered gold. You can almost feel the oppressive heat of the African mines, hear the rhythmic clang of pickaxes against rock, and sensed the growing despair of the Anunnaki workers. They came to this world as pioneers, as saviors of their home planet. But after millennia of thankless toil, they feel like slaves. The command structure is fraying. The brothers Enlil and Enki, already rivals, are pushed further apart by the stress of the mission. Enlil is the demanding boss focused on production quotas, while Enki, down in the trenches with the workers, is more sympathetic to their plight. The atmosphere is explosive. A rebellion is brewing deep beneath the African soil, and it's about to change the course of the mission and the future of planet Earth forever. The gods are about to go on strike. The air in the subterranean gold mines of the Abzu is thick with rock dust, sweat, and simmering resentment. For tens of thousands of years, the lesser Anunnaki have labored in this sweltering darkness, a world away from the cool, celestial light of their home Nibiru. The initial excitement of the Earth mission has long since evaporated, replaced by the monotonous, soul-crushing reality of hard labor. The promised salvation of their planet feels impossibly distant, while the ache in their backs is immediate and constant. You can feel the tension as a palpable force, a static charge waiting for a spark. This is where the story shifts from a tale of cosmic exploration to a drama of labor relations. And at the center of it is the creation of a new being, a substitute worker designed to relieve the suffering of the gods. But this creation is not a gentle, magical act. It is a desperate, pragmatic solution to a crisis, a piece of biological engineering born from a mutiny. Sitchin turns his attention to a text known as the Atrahasis Epic, one of the most complete Mesopotamian accounts of creation and the Great Flood. It begins not with the creation of the universe, but with the gods at work. When the gods, manlike, bore the work and suffer the toil, the epic starts. The toil of the gods was great, the work was heavy, the distress was much. The text explicitly divides the gods into two classes: the high-ranking Anunnaki, the seven great gods who are the managers and executives, and the lesser gods, the Igigi, who are tasked with the manual labor. It's the Igigi who are digging the canals, building the shrines, and, in Sitchin's interpretation, mining the gold in Africa. After 3,600 years of this punishing work, one shar, one full orbital period of Nibiru, the Igigi finally snap. They have had enough. They burn their tools in a dramatic, symbolic act of defiance. They surround the great house of Enlil, their commander-in-chief, in the dead of night. Their protest is not a quiet one. It is a full-blown mutiny. Enlil is awakened by the roar of the angry mob. He is terrified, and his first instinct is to fight. But his advisors urge caution. The situation is delicate. These are not slaves. They are their own people, their fellow astronauts. A council of the great Anunnaki is convened. Anu, the distant king on Nibiru, is patched in via some form of long-range communication. Enlil presents his case, demanding that the ringleader of the mutiny be identified and punished. But the great gods are sympathetic to the workers. They call in Enki, the scientist, the one who has been overseeing the Abzu mines. He confirms the conditions. The work is too hard, the suffering too great. The Igigi have a legitimate grievance. The entire gold mining project, the mission to save Nibiru, is on the verge of collapse. It is here that Enki, the brilliant problem solver, proposes a radical, world-changing idea. While the birth goddess is present, he says, let her create a mortal man. Let him bear the yoke. Let him carry the toil of the gods. He's not talking about inventing a robot or a new piece of machinery. He's proposing a biological solution. A Lulu, a primitive worker. The target for this genetic upgrade is already here. The Anunnaki have been observing the local fauna, including the various species of hominids that populate Africa. They are bipedal. They have opposable thumbs, but they are not intelligent. They live in caves, use primitive stone tools, and lack the capacity for complex thought or communication. They are, in essence, a promising biological chassis waiting for a software update. The plan, as outlined by Enki, is to take the essence, the DNA, of an existing ape man and mix it with the essence of the Anunnaki themselves. They will jumpstart the evolutionary process, creating a hybrid being that is strong enough to do the work but intelligent enough to understand orders. A being made in their image. The chief medical officer and fertility goddess, Ninhursag, also known as Ninti or Lady of the Rib, is tasked with leading the project. She is the expert in what the texts call the clay of life. The scene that follows is described in the texts with a fascinating mix of biological and ritualistic language. Enki and Ninhursag go to a special laboratory, a clean room the texts call the Bit Shimti, the house where the wind of life is breathed in. Here, Ninhursag begins her experiments. It's not an easy process. There are many failed attempts, resulting in beings with deformities and defects, creatures that cannot speak or walk properly. A quirky tidbit: one Sumerian text describes these failed experiments in detail, listing creatures with no genitals, barren women, and beings with twisted limbs. Mainstream scholars see this as an etiological myth explaining the existence of congenital birth defects in the human population. Sitchin saw it as the messy, trial-and-error process of genetic engineering. Finally, they get the formula right. Ninhursag mixes the clay, the biological material of the hominid, with the blood of a young Anunnaki god who is sacrificed for the purpose, his spirit and DNA providing the divine spark. She then implants this fertilized egg into the womb of a female Anunnaki volunteer, a birth goddess who will act as a surrogate mother. After a tense period of waiting, the first successful human is born. They call him the Adamu. It is a name that echoes, with chilling precision, the biblical Adam. He is a perfect worker, strong, docile, and intelligent enough to be trained. The Anunnaki have their slave. A mainstream historical fact, the out-of-Africa theory is the most widely accepted model of human evolution. It posits that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, and then migrated out to populate the rest of the world. Sitchin's timeline, placing the creation of the Adamu in Africa around this same period, is a clever and deliberate alignment with established anthropological science. Historians still argue about the relationship between the Sumerian creation stories and the biblical book of Genesis. The parallels are undeniable: the creation of man from clay, the divine beings who walk the earth, the introduction of knowledge. Mainstream scholarship generally holds that the Hebrew scribes who wrote Genesis during their Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE were heavily influenced by the Mesopotamian myths they encountered there. Sitchin, of course, flipped this on its head, arguing that both the Sumerian and Hebrew texts were drawing from the same original historical events. You are now standing at the dawn of humanity, but it's not a glorious, divinely ordained moment. It's a pragmatic, slightly grubby solution to a labor dispute. We were not created to contemplate the heavens or to be masters of our own destiny. We were created to work, to take the load off the backs of our creators, to mine their gold. The first Adamu is brought before the assembled gods. They marvel at their creation. He is a success. The problem is solved. Or so they think. They have created a new species, but they have also introduced a wild card into the planetary ecosystem, one that will prove to be far more complex and far more troublesome than they could ever have imagined. The birth of the Adamu is a success, a triumph of Anunnaki genetic engineering. Ninhursag and Enki have delivered on their promise. A small batch of these primitive workers, these perfect biological machines, are created through surrogate Anunnaki mothers. They are strong, they are obedient, and they are quickly put to work in the gold mines of southeastern Africa and in the agricultural fields of Mesopotamia. For a time, the crisis is averted. The gold shipments resume their journey to Nibiru. The grand cosmic project is back on track, but you can already sense the next problem on the horizon. The solution has created an entirely new set of complications. The first issue is one of scale. The Anunnaki can only produce a handful of these workers at a time. The process of using Anunnaki birth goddesses as surrogates is slow, inefficient, and places a heavy burden on the female Anunnaki. They need to mass-produce their new workforce if they are ever going to meet their ever-expanding quotas. The mines are vast, the work endless. They need an army of laborers, not a boutique collection. Once again, it is the brilliant and ever-controversial Enki who devises the next great leap forward. The Adamu needs to be able to procreate on its own. He performs another genetic modification. He tinkers with the chromosomes of the Adamu and his female counterpart. The Tiamat, a name Sitchin, connects to Mother of Life. He enables them to reproduce sexually, to multiply, and fill the earth with more workers. This act is the core of what Sitchin identifies as the story of the Garden of Eden. In his retelling, the garden is not a magical paradise, but protected, well-irrigated enclosure in Mesopotamia, a sort of biological preserve where the Anunnaki kept and studied their new creations. Enlil, the stern commander, was furious with Enki's unauthorized genetic meddling. He had wanted a sterile, controllable workforce, a biological mule. Enki had just given them the ability to become a self-replicating species, to become a true population. This act of giving humanity the knowledge of procreation is symbolized in the biblical story as eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. The serpent in the garden, who tempts Eve, is none other than Enki himself. The Sumerian symbol for Enki was often two entwined serpents, a symbol of medicine and genetics that survives to this day as the caduceus. Enlil, in his rage at this loss of control, is the one who casts Adam and Eve out of the garden, forcing them to fend for themselves in the wilderness. It's not a punishment for sin. It's the angry reaction of a project manager whose lead scientist went rogue. The plan, from a labor perspective, works spectacularly. Humanity multiplies. Soon, there are enough workers to take over all the most arduous tasks. The Ijajai gods, the ones who had mutinied in the first place, are finally relieved of their duty in the mines. But what to do with them now? They are a large group of unemployed, junior-grade astronauts. So they are reassigned. They are tasked with operating the shuttles that ferry the processed gold from Earth's surface to the larger interplanetary vessels that orbit the planet. They become the new space truckers of the Anunnaki Enterprise, manning the way stations on Mars, a planet the texts call Lamu, and orbiting Earth. This brings us to another dramatic episode in the Anunnaki soap opera. As humanity flourishes, the Ijajai, orbiting the planet and looking down, begin to notice the beauty of the daughters of men. After long, lonely millennia in space, they find these new hybrid beings irresistible. In a coordinated act of mass rebellion, a group of 200 Ijajai, led by a chief named Shemhazai, a name from the non-canonical book of Enoch, decide to abandon their posts. They descend to Earth, landing on Mount Hermon, and take human wives for themselves. This is a direct parallel to the story in Genesis, chapter 6. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. These unions produced children, a race of demigods described in the Bible as the Nephilim, the giants, mighty men which were of old, men of renown. To Sitchin, this was no myth. This was a second, unsanctioned genetic mingling. The carefully controlled bloodline of the Anunnaki was now being diluted. The cosmic class system was breaking down. Enlil is, predictably, apoplectic. This is the ultimate breakdown of discipline. His carefully managed project is spiraling into chaos. First, Enki creates a self-replicating workforce without permission, and now the Ijajai are deserting their posts and interbreeding with the slave race. The earth is becoming a chaotic, unruly mess. The noise of humanity, their clamor and their activity, rises up to the heavens and grates on his nerves. The texts describe his rage. The land became wide, the people became numerous. The land bellowed like a bull. It's the complaint of an exasperated colonial governor whose colony has become ungovernable. A mainstream historical fact. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Hebrew apocalyptic text, is not part of the standard biblical canon for most Christian and Jewish traditions, but it is considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. It describes in great detail the story of the Watchers, the Ijajai, who descended, taught humanity forbidden arts like metalworking and cosmetics, and interbred with human women, leading to the creation of giants and unleashing chaos upon the world. Scholars date parts of the book to as early as 300 BCE. A quirky tidbit: one of the forbidden arts the Fallen Watchers supposedly taught women was the use of makeup and adornments. Specifically, the text mentions the art of making up the eyes. So, according to this legend, the invention of eyeliner was a direct result of rebellious angels trying to impress their human girlfriends. A truly celestial pickup strategy. Historians still argue about the identity of the Igigi. In some Mesopotamian texts, the term Igigi seems to be used almost interchangeably with Anunnaki, or to refer to the gods of the heavens, while Anunnaki refers to the gods of the earth and underworld. In other texts, like the Atrahasis epic, they are clearly a separate, subordinate class of deities. This ambiguity allows for multiple interpretations, and Sitchin seized upon it to define them as the astronaut core. The strike is over, but the consequences are just beginning. The creation of humanity solved one problem, but created a dozen more. The world is now populated by a rapidly expanding human race, a rebellious group of demigods, and a deeply divided Anunnaki leadership. Enlil sees his grand project tainted, his authority undermined. He looks upon the teeming, chaotic world below him not with the pride of a creator, but with the disgust of a landlord whose tenants have wrecked the property. His patience is wearing thin. The final solution in his mind is becoming increasingly clear. He needs to reset the entire experiment. He needs a flood. The Earth is now a very different place from the pristine, empty world the Anunnaki first found. Cities, though still primitive by our standards, the landscape of Mesopotamia. Human populations are growing, their languages and cultures diversifying. And most importantly, the Anunnaki have introduced a new institution to manage their burgeoning workforce: kingship. After the chaos of the Igigi rebellion and the unsanctioned interbreeding, Enlil and the High Council realized they couldn't rule humanity directly. It was too inefficient. They needed intermediaries, chain of command. So, they created the concept of royalty. This is Sitchin's interpretation of one of the most remarkable and puzzling artifacts ever unearthed from the sands of Iraq: the Sumerian king list. You find yourself in a quiet, climate-control museum, perhaps the Ashmolean in Oxford, staring at a four-sided clay prism covered in tightly packed cuneiform script. This is the well-blundell prism, the most complete copy of the king list ever found. It's not a narrative. It's a ledger, a stark, chronological list of rulers, the cities they ruled from, and the lengths of their reigns. And this is where reality seems to buckle. The list begins with a simple, declarative statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. It then lists the first king of Eridu, Alulim, and states that he ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alaungar, ruled for 36,000 years. The list continues, naming 8 kings in 5 different cities, for a total of 241,200 years, before, as the text chillingly states, the flood swept over. These are not just long reigns. They are impossibly, fantastically long. No human being could live for tens of thousands of years. What are we to make of this? Mainstream historians and archaeologists have several explanations. The most common is that these numbers are not literal, but mythological. They may be symbolic, representing the king's power and divine favor. A king who ruled for 36,000 years was simply a very, very important king. Another theory is that the numbers are based on a mathematical formula, perhaps related to Sumerian cosmology or numerology, intended to create a sense of a deep, sacred antiquity for their civilization. It was propaganda, a way for later kings to legitimize their own much shorter reigns by connecting them to an epic, God-touched past. A mainstream historical fact: the Sumerians used a sexagesimal, base 60 number system, which we still use for telling time and for measuring circles. Some scholars have proposed that the huge numbers in the king list are the result of misinterpreting or embellishing numbers within this system, perhaps squaring numbers of importance to create an impressive, but not literal total. Sitchin, of course, had a much more direct interpretation. He looked at these numbers and saw a simple, elegant solution. The list was accurate, but the kings weren't human. At least not at first. The kingship that descended from heaven was the Anunnaki leadership themselves. These first 8 kings, the ones with impossibly long reigns, were the Anunnaki commanders of the Earth mission, ruling directly over the cities they had founded. And their reigns were measured not in Earth years, but in their own unit of time, the Shar, the 3,600-year orbit of their home planet Nibiru. If you measure their lifespans relative to the Nibiruan year, their ages, while still long, become more plausible for a technologically advanced species with extended longevity. A king who ruled for 10 Shars, 36,000 Earth years, was simply on a long tour of duty. The king list is bisected by a single catastrophic event, the Great Flood. After the flood, the list resumes. After the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. But now something has changed. The reigns of the post-flood kings are dramatically shorter. The first king of the new era, Jushur of Kish, ruled for 1,200 years. Still impossible for a human, but a drastic reduction. As the list progresses, the reigns get shorter and shorter, from hundreds of years down to the historically verifiable reigns of a few decades, like that of the famous hero king Gilgamesh, who is listed as ruling Uruk for 126 years. For Sitchin, this was the key. The period after the flood marks a new policy by the Anunnaki. They no longer rule directly. Instead, they appoint human Anunnaki hybrids, the mighty men of renown, the children of the Igigi and their human wives, to serve as their proxies. These demigods had lifespans that were much longer than ordinary humans, but far shorter than the pure-blooded Anunnaki. This explains the gradual decrease in reign lengths. As the Anunnaki bloodline became more and more diluted with each passing generation, the lifespans of the kings shortened until they eventually fell into the normal human range. The king list wasn't a myth. It was a genetic record, a chronicle of the slow fading of the gods' blood from the veins of humanity's rulers, a quirky tidbit. The concept of a ridiculously long-lived ancestor is a common theme in many ancient cultures. The Bible's own list of patriarchs from Adam to Noah in the book of Genesis features men who lived for astonishing lengths of time. Adam lived for 930 years, Seth for 912, and Methuselah, the most famous, for a staggering 969 years. Sitchin argued this wasn't a coincidence. The biblical scribes were recording the same phenomenon as the Sumerians, the extended lifespans of the first generations of humans who had a higher concentration of Anunnaki DNA. Historians still argue about the historicity of the king list. Is it a faithful, if exaggerated, record of actual rulers, or is it a literary construct? The discovery of archaeological evidence for some of the later kings on the list, like Enmebrajezi of Kish, lent credence to the idea that it wasn't pure fiction. It seems to be a blend of myth and reality, with a mythological, antediluvian, pre-flood section grafted onto a more historically grounded list of later dynasties. The debate is about where the line between myth and memory is drawn. You stare at the clay prism, at the dense, tiny wedges that represent millennia of rule. You see the world through Sitchin's eyes. It's a corporate flowchart, a record of management changes. The pre-flood section is the Anunnaki Executive Board. The post-flood section is the era of middle management, the demigod kings. It's a tidy, compelling explanation for an otherwise baffling document. But as you look at the line that simply says, "The flood swept over," a chill runs down your spine. This wasn't just a line item on a ledger. It was the end of a world. And for Enlil, the angry, frustrated commander, it couldn't come soon enough. The decision had been made in the halls of the gods. The noisy, chaotic experiment of humanity was about to be terminated. The clamor of humanity has reached a breaking point for Enlil. The interbreeding, the rebellions, the sheer, unrelenting noise of his creation has frayed his last nerve. From his command center in Nippur, he looks out upon a world he no longer recognizes, a world teeming with beings he now considers a failed experiment. He makes a decision, a terrible and final one. He will not just punish humanity, he will eradicate it. He will wash the slate clean. And he has the perfect opportunity to do so, a natural catastrophe that he can use as a weapon. You find yourself standing on a high ridge overlooking the plains of Mesopotamia. The air is strangely heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. The animals are restless. A sense of impending doom hangs over the land. According to Sitchin's timeline, the year is approximately 13,000 BCE. The next passage of the home planet Nibiru through the inner solar system is imminent. This is not, in itself, a threat to Earth. But the Anunnaki scientists know something that humanity does not. The immense gravitational pull of the approaching planet is going to have a catastrophic effect on the Earth, specifically on the vast ice sheet of Antarctica. For millennia, the Anunnaki have been monitoring the stability of this southern ice cap. They know it is precariously balanced. The passage of Nibiru, they calculate, will exert just enough gravitational force to destabilize the entire sheet, causing a massive portion of it to slip into the sea. This will trigger a displacement wave of unimaginable scale, a global tsunami that will scour the continents and wipe out almost all life on the surface. It is the perfect, plausibly deniable apocalypse. It's not that Enlil is creating the flood. He is simply choosing not to warn anyone about it. He will let nature, nudged by celestial mechanics, do his dirty work for him. He convenes the great council of the Anunnaki and makes them all swear a solemn oath of secrecy. They are not to reveal the coming calamity to the humans. They are to pack up their essential equipment, prepare their skyships for evacuation into orbit, and let their noisy, troublesome creation perish. The decision is made. The fate of humanity is sealed. But one God cannot abide by this decision, Enki. The scientist, the creator, the one who has always had a complicated, paternal affection for his hybrid children. The oath he swore prevents him from speaking directly to any human, but Enki, the master of loopholes, finds a way around it. He travels to the city of Shurapak, to the home of a man he knows to be righteous and intelligent. This man is the Sumerian equivalent of Noah. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, his name is Utnapishtim. In the Atrahasis epic, he is Atrahasis. Sitchin often refers to him by another of his names, Zeusidra. Enki doesn't speak to Zeusidra directly. That would violate his oath. Instead, he speaks to the wall of the man's reed hut. Reed hut, reed hut. Wall, wall, he proclaims, in a bit of divine plausible deniability. Reed hut, hearken. Wall, pay attention. Man of Shurapak, son of Ubra-Tutu, tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon your possessions and seek life. Spurn property and save your soul. Tear down your house and build a boat. The dimensions of the boat are to be measured. He then gives Zeusidra the precise technical specifications for the vessel, its size, the need for multiple decks, a strong roof, and the importance of sealing the entire structure with bitumen, that wonderful Sumerian supergunk you saw earlier. It is not just a boat. It is a submersible, a vessel designed to survive not just floating on water, but being overwhelmed by a massive, violent wave. A mainstream historical fact. The story of a great, world-destroying flood is not unique to the Bible or Sumerian texts. It is one of the most widespread myths in human culture, appearing in over 200 different societies on every inhabited continent. From the story of Deucalion in Greek mythology to the Manu legend in India and the tales of the Anishinaabe people in North America, the motif of a handful of survivors escaping a divine deluge in a boat is a near-universal human story. Geologists have also confirmed that at the end of the last ice age, around this very time, there was indeed massive, catastrophic flooding in many parts of the world as glaciers melted and sea levels rose dramatically. Zeusidra, understandably confused but trusting the strange divine voice coming from his wall, does as he is told. He tells his skeptical neighbors he is building the boat because he has to leave the land, as he has fallen out of favor with the great god Enlil and must go to live with Enki in the Abzu. His excuse is a brilliant piece of diplomacy. It explains his departure without revealing the apocalyptic secret. He gathers his family, a few skilled craftsmen, and the seed of all living things, which Sitchin interprets not as a literal zoo of all animals, but as DNA samples, the biological data needed to regenerate life after the cataclysm. The day arrives. The weather turns ominous. Ziusidra and his family board the vessel and seal the door. Then, the deluge begins. The texts describe it with terrifying power. A black cloud rose from the horizon. All that was bright was turned to darkness. The land was shattered like a pot. This is not just rain. It is a tidal wave. For 6 days and 7 nights, the world is chaos. The Anunnaki themselves watch the destruction from the safety of their orbiting spacecraft, and even they are horrified by the scale of the devastation they have allowed. The texts say they cowered like dogs, huddled against the outer wall, weeping at the destruction of their world and their creation. Even Inanna, the fierce goddess of war, weeps for her people. A quirky tidbit: in the Epic of Gilgamesh, after the flood subsides and Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountain, his first act is to send out a series of birds, a dove, then a swallow, then a raven, to see if they can find dry land. This is, of course, the exact same sequence of birds Noah sends out from his ark in the book of Genesis, one of the most direct and undeniable parallels between the two accounts. Historians still argue about the historical basis of the Great Flood. Was it a single, global event, or a collection of memories of numerous, localized, but devastating river floods that were common in Mesopotamia? The discovery of a thick layer of flood silt at ancient sites like Ur, dating to around 2900 BCE, was once hailed as proof of the biblical flood, but it has since been understood as evidence of a massive, but regional river flood, not a global inundation. Sitchin's theory of the Antarctic ice sheet provides a mechanism for a truly global event that ties into real climate history. When the waters finally recede, Ziusidra's ark comes to rest on the peak of Mount Ararat. He emerges into a silent, devastated world. He makes a sacrifice to the gods. Enlil, descending from his ship, is enraged when he discovers the survivors. He knows he has been betrayed. Who has been leaking secrets? He bellows. The blame immediately falls on Enki, who steps forward and delivers a powerful speech, chastising Enlil for his lack of wisdom. How could you, without thought, bring about this deluge? On the sinner let his sin rest. On the transgressor let his transgression rest. But be lenient, that he not be cut off. Be patient, that he not be cast down. It is a plea for compassionate, proportional justice. The argument is won. Enlil's anger subsides, replaced by a grudging acceptance. He grants Ziusidra and his wife immortality, and the Anunnaki commit to helping humanity rebuild. The Great Reset is over. But it wasn't a complete success. Life, as Enki had planned, had found a way. The age of direct rule and open meddling was over. A new chapter in the relationship between gods and men was about to begin, one built on distance, secrecy, and a new kind of control. The world after the flood is a silent, muddy, waterlogged wasteland. The great cities of the Anunnaki are gone, buried under thick layers of silt. The human population has been reduced to a single family. It's a clean slate, but it's a desolate one. The Anunnaki, having ridden out the cataclysm in their orbiting spacecraft, descend once more to a world they must now rebuild from scratch. There is a new tense piece between the factions of Enlil and Enki. Enlil's plan for total annihilation failed, but Enki's victory in saving humanity has sobered him. A new contract is drawn up between the gods and their surviving creations. Humanity, descended from the line of Ziusidra, is allowed to flourish once more. The Anunnaki gift them the tools of civilization for a second time: agriculture, animal husbandry, the skills needed to build new cities from the mud. This, for Sitchin, is the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution, the period around 10,000 BCE when humanity suddenly transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities. It wasn't a slow, natural evolution, he argued. It was a deliberate reintroduction of technology by our alien overlords. They needed their workforce back, after all. The center of this new civilization is once again Mesopotamia. The Anunnaki established new cities, build upon the ruins of the old, and re-establish their command centers and their crucial spaceport. But something is different now. The gods are more distant. They confer the rights of kingship to human rulers, the demigod descendants you learn about from the king list, and largely retreat to their own sacred enclosures or to their orbiting stations. The age of direct, hands-on management is over. As humanity repopulates the Earth, they spread out from the highlands of the Near East, resettling the plains of Shinar Sumer. They retain a single language and a single culture, a unified civilization under the watchful, but now more distant eyes of their gods. They prosper. Their population booms. And with this prosperity comes ambition. The old stories of the Anunnaki, of their sky ships, and their home in the heavens are still remembered. Humanity looks up at the sky not just with reverence, but with a burgeoning technological curiosity. They decide they don't just want to serve the gods, they want to join them. This brings you to the foot of a new, colossal structure rising from the plains. It is a ziggurat, but it is grander and more ambitious than any that came before. This is the scene of the biblical Tower of Babel. In the book of Genesis, the story is presented as an act of human hubris. Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. God, seeing this, is displeased by their ambition and comes down to confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Sitchin reads this story not as a fable about pride, but as an account of a serious technological and political crisis. The key for him is in the phrase, "Let us make a name for ourselves." The word for name in the original Hebrew is Shem. Sitchin argues that the primary meaning of Shem is not name, but an object that moves or flies. He points to its use in other contexts to describe things that shoot up into the sky. The people of Babel, he claims, were not trying to build a simple mud brick tower to poke through the clouds. They were using the technological knowledge gifted to them by the Anunnaki to try and build their own Shem, their own rocket ship. They were attempting to build a launch tower, a spaceport, to achieve spaceflight on their own terms. This was an act of rebellion far more dangerous than the labor strikes or the illicit marriages. This was humanity trying to seize the ultimate power of the Anunnaki, the ability to travel between worlds. It was a declaration of independence. For Enlil, the perpetual hawk in the Anunnaki Council, this was the final straw. He had warned them that giving humanity too much knowledge was a mistake, and here was the proof. They couldn't be trusted. The Anunnaki Council convenes, and the decision is swift and decisive. They will not destroy humanity again. Enki's pact prevented that. But they will cripple them. They will shatter their unity, ensuring they can never again cooperate on a project of this scale. The Bible says God confused their language. Sitchin imagines a more direct technological intervention. The Anunnaki descended and forcibly scattered the population. They deliberately introduced different languages and different writing systems to different groups, sowing the seeds of discord and nationalism. They broke the world into pieces, creating the patchwork of competing cultures, nations, and languages that we know today. It was a strategic act of cultural sabotage on a global scale. The Tower of Babel was destroyed, the city abandoned, and humanity's dream of reaching the stars was extinguished. A mainstream historical fact. Linguists and historians trace the origins of the world's language families back to a hypothetical proto-language spoken deep in prehistory. The story of the Tower of Babel has long been a powerful folk explanation for the world's linguistic diversity, capturing the human sense of a lost, primordial unity. The city of Babylon, with its colossal ziggurat etymology, the foundation of heaven and earth, is the likely historical inspiration for the biblical tower. A quirky tidbit, the phrase babbling on comes directly from the story of Babel. The Hebrew name for the city, Babel, is very similar to the Hebrew word Balal, meaning to confuse or to jumble. So the story itself contains a clever pun that has echoed through the ages, forever associating the city of Babylon with incomprehensible speech. Historians still argue about the true purpose of the great ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Were they simply temples, symbolic stairways to heaven for the priests to commune with the gods? Were they astronomical observatories? Or were they, as some have suggested, elevated refuges built to survive the predictable and devastating river floods? The idea of them as launch pads, while central to the ancient astronaut theory, has no support in mainstream archaeology, which points to their solid, mud brick construction as evidence that they were never intended to support the fiery blast-off of a vehicle. You look at the ruins of the Great Tower, a monument to humanity's broken ambition. The Anunnaki's solution was brutally effective. By dividing humanity, they ensured their own security and technological monopoly. The world was now a tapestry of distrustful, competing tribes. The dream of a unified human civilization reaching for the stars was over. From this point on, the Anunnaki would rule from the shadows. Their influence still felt, their presence still remembered, but their true nature obscured behind a veil of myth and religion. They were no longer managers or even kings. They had become gods in the truest sense, remote, mysterious, and all-powerful. And they left behind strange clues to their presence, cryptic symbols carved in stone that continue to puzzle us to this day. Humanity is now scattered, its unity shattered, its grand ambitions of space travel reduced to a confused memory. The Anunnaki have retreated further into the shadows, their direct rule replaced by a more subtle system of influence. Yet, they left their fingerprints everywhere. You are no longer following a single timeline, but drifting through millennia of art and iconography, from the dusty plains of Mesopotamia to the lush jungles of Central America, searching for the strange, recurring symbols they left behind. These are the visual echoes of their presence, baffling clues that have puzzled historians for centuries. Your first stop is back in the heartland of the Anunnaki story, a museum gallery filled with Assyrian and Babylonian relief carvings. You stand before a colossal stone panel taken from the palace of a king. It depicts a winged genie, a supernatural being. He is powerfully built, with a man's body, a stern, bearded face, and 4 magnificent eagle wings. In one hand, he holds what looks for all the world like a pine cone. In the other, he carries a small bucket or basket, which ancient astronaut theorists have dubbed the handbag of the gods. This imagery is everywhere in Mesopotamian art. What does it mean? Mainstream interpretation connects this to religious ritual. The figure is an Apkallu, a wise spirit, and he is performing a ceremony of purification or magical blessing. The pine cone, Mullaloo, is thought to be an object used to sprinkle holy water from the bucket, Bandadu. It is a scene of divine protection, the king's palace being sanctified by a benevolent spirit. It's a perfectly reasonable and well-supported academic theory. But Sitchin and his followers see something else entirely. They see a record of technology. The winged figure is an Anunnaki, perhaps in his full ceremonial flight suit. The pine cone, they suggest, could be a symbol for a complex piece of knowledge, perhaps relating to the pineal gland, the third eye, or it could be a tool, an instrument of some kind. The handbag, however, is the most tantalizing clue. Its standardized shape, its handle, its appearance as a piece of manufactured equipment. It looks less like a ritual basket and more like a toolkit, a power pack, or perhaps a container for carrying those precious biological samples, the seed of life that Ziusadra carried onto the ark. What makes this handbag symbol so compelling is its bizarre ubiquity. You leave the halls of Mesopotamian art and travel halfway around the world. You find yourself standing before the monumental pillars of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, a site dated to an astonishing 12,000 years ago, predating Sumer by millennia. Carved onto one of the giant T-shaped pillars is a row of 3 distinct shapes. 3 handbags, identical in form to the ones held by the Assyrian genies thousands of years later and hundreds of miles away. How is this possible? The mystery deepens. You journey across the Atlantic to the ruins of ancient Mesoamerica. In the Olmec culture, considered the mother culture of Mexico, you find a stone carving of the god Quetzalcoatl. And there, in his hand, is the same object, a handbag. Later, at the Toltec capital of Tula, you see the giant Atlantean warrior statues. These stoic figures, while not holding the bag, have other strange features. They seem to be holding a weapon, an ATL or spear thrower, that some theorists have compared to a technological ray gun or plasma rifle. The evidence is ambiguous, a Rorschach test in stone. Do you see a priest, or do you see a spaceman? Then there is the issue of the wrist. You look closer at those Mesopotamian reliefs. The winged genies, the kings, the gods. Many of them are depicted wearing what looks uncannily like a modern wristwatch. It's a decorative rosette on a wristband, but its placement and appearance are jarringly familiar. Mainstream archaeologists identify it as a simple piece of jewelry, a symbol of royalty or divinity, perhaps representing the star of their patron god, like Ishtar/Inanna. But to the ancient astronaut theorist, the conclusion is obvious. It's not a symbol. It's a device. A communication unit, a health monitor, a remote control for their skyships. It's a piece of Anunnaki technology worn as casually as you would wear an Apple Watch. A quirky tidbit, the pinecone symbol has a fascinating biological parallel. The pineal gland, a tiny pinecone-shaped endocrine gland located deep in the center of the brain, was once called the seed of the soul by philosophers like Descartes. It is associated with the production of melatonin and is sensitive to light. In many mystical and spiritual traditions, it is considered the third eye, a gateway to higher consciousness and enlightenment. Proponents of the Anunnaki theory suggest the gods were depicted with a pine cone to symbolize their mastery over this biological portal, their ability to manipulate human consciousness. A mainstream historical fact, the symbol of the winged disk, a solar disk with wings, is one of the most pervasive symbols in the ancient Near East, used by Egyptians, Hittites, and Persians as well as Mesopotamians. For the Sumerians and Assyrians, it often represented the sun god Shamash, Utu, or the supreme god Ashur. For Sitchin, this was the most obvious symbol of all, a literal depiction of the home planet Nibiru, with its vast, winged orbit, or perhaps a representation of the Anunnaki's aerial craft. Historians still argue about the diffusion of these specific cultural symbols across the ancient world. How did the same handbag motif appear in Turkey, Mesopotamia, and Mexico, cultures separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles? Mainstream scholars propose theories of ancient, lost trade routes, cultural diffusion through unknown intermediaries, or simple coincidence. The idea that different cultures can independently develop similar-looking symbols to represent common concepts like container or a sacred object. For ancient astronaut theorists, the answer is much simpler. They weren't carried by traders. They were carried by the gods themselves, who visited all of these places and were depicted by the local artists, leaving behind a global, standardized calling card. You stand back and look at the whole collection of strange images. The handbag, the pine cone, the wristwatch, the winged disc. Are they merely religious symbols, their meanings lost to the mists of time? Or are they a gallery of alien technology, a garbled but persistent memory of our Creator's toolkit, staring at us from behind the glass of a museum case? The answer depends entirely on the lens you choose to look through. The line between art history and ufology has become impossibly, tantalizingly blurred. The evidence is right there, carved in stone, waiting for an interpretation. The trail of baffling symbols has led you across the globe, suggesting a presence that was not confined to the river valleys of Mesopotamia. The handbags at Göbekli Tepe and the reliefs in Mexico have planted a provocative question in your mind. If the Anunnaki were real, and if their mission was a planetary-scale mining operation, would they really have limited their influence to Sumer? Sitchin and other proponents of the ancient astronaut theory argue no. The operation was global, and so was their rule. You now expand your journey, looking for the fingerprints of the Anunnaki in the foundations of other great ancient civilizations. Your first destination is the land of the Nile, ancient Egypt. You stand before the pyramids of Giza, their geometric perfection a stark contrast to the sprawling, organic chaos of Cairo nearby. The official story taught by mainstream Egyptology is that these magnificent tombs were built for the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty around 2500 BCE, constructed with copper tools and sheer human muscle by a massive, well-organized workforce. It is a testament to human ingenuity, social organization, and religious devotion. But as you stare up at the millions of massive stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, a nagging doubt creeps in. Could they really have quarried, transported, and lifted these stones with such precision using only ropes, ramps, and copper chisels? Ancient astronaut theorists say no. They argue that the level of engineering and mathematical precision is simply too high for the known technology of the period. The pyramids, they suggest, were not tombs at all, but power plants, energy beacons, or navigational aids. And they were built far earlier than the history books claim, perhaps by the Anunnaki themselves during the initial phase of their Earth mission. Sitchin proposed a direct link between the pantheons. The great Egyptian god Ra, the king of the gods, that was Marduk, Enki's ambitious son, who was eventually given dominion over the lands of Egypt after a series of bitter territorial disputes with the Enlilite clan. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, the one who taught humanity the sciences, that was Ningish Zida, another of Enki's sons, a master of science and genetics. In this view, the Egyptian gods were not a separate pantheon. They were simply the Anunnaki leadership of the Enki clan, ruling over their African territory under different names and with different headdresses. It was a corporate rebranding. Now you travel across the ocean again, this time to the high Andes of South America. You are in Peru, at the site of Puma Punku, a place that is in many ways even more baffling than the Giza pyramids. Here, scattered across a high-altitude plain, are the ruins of a temple complex. The stones are not just large. They are masterpieces of impossible stonework. They are made of granite and diorite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. Yet they are cut with laser-like precision, with perfectly straight edges, right angles, and smooth, polished surfaces. Most famously, there are H-blocks, complex, interlocking stones with multiple planes and drill holes, all seemingly mass-produced and identical, a mainstream historical fact. The official archaeological dating places Puma Punku's construction around 500 to 600 CE, attributing it to the Tiwanaku culture. The proposed method of construction involves slowly and laboriously pounding the stones into shape with harder river cobbles and using sand and water as an abrasive for polishing. It is considered a marvel of pre-industrial engineering. However, the sheer precision of the cuts has led even some mainstream engineers to express bewilderment at how it could have been achieved with such primitive tools. To the ancient astronaut theorist, Puma Punku is a smoking gun. This is not the work of people with stone hammers. This is evidence of advanced machining, of power tools, perhaps even of prefabricated concrete or geopolymer technology. They point to it as a clear sign of Anunnaki construction. Sitchin identified the great Andean god Viracocha, the creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca, as an Anunnaki leader, specifically an Enlilite god, establishing a remote outpost in the Andes to exploit the region's vast mineral wealth, not just gold, but also tin, which was crucial for making bronze. The legendary Inca cities of Cusco and Machu Picchu, and the mysterious Nazca lines were all, in this view, part of the Anunnaki's South American infrastructure. The journey continues, this time to the Indus Valley, in modern-day Pakistan and India. Here, the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro flourished around the same time as the Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations. They had sophisticated urban planning, grid-like streets, and advanced plumbing and sewage systems that were unrivaled until the Roman era. Their mythology, which would later evolve into the Hindu pantheon, is filled with stories that echo the Mesopotamian tales. There are flying machines called Vimanas, devastating celestial weapons called Astras, and gods whose dramas and powers feel remarkably similar to those of the Anunnaki. Was the Hindu god Indra, the king of the gods who wielded a thunderbolt and rode a celestial chariot, simply another name for Enlil or Marduk? The parallels are tantalizing. A quirky tidbit, in the great Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, there is a detailed description of a weapon called the Brahmastra. When unleashed, it created an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. The winds began to blow, clouds roared, and the very elements seemed disturbed. Hair and nails of the soldiers fell out. Pottery broke without cause, and birds turned white. 4 years after, the land was barren and the rivers poisoned. To many modern readers, this sounds eerily like a description of a nuclear explosion and its radioactive fallout. Historians still argue about the nature and extent of the connections between these great Bronze Age civilizations. While there is clear archaeological evidence of trade links between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, the idea of a single, unified supercivilization or a common source of divine inspiration is rejected by mainstream scholarship. They emphasize the unique and independent development of each culture's art, language, and religion. The similarities, they argue, are the result of common human responses to similar environmental and social challenges or limited cultural borrowing through trade, not the result of a global alien administration. You are left with a dizzying, interconnected map of the ancient world. In this grand, unified theory, the history of humanity is not a story of separate civilizations rising and falling in isolation. It is the story of a single, planet-wide Anunnaki colony, with different regions managed by different divine governors. The Tower of Babel incident shattered their political unity, but the gods remained, their influence echoing in the pyramids of Egypt, the precision cuts of Puma Punku, and the epic poems of India. The whole world was their stage, and all the men and women merely players, living and dying under the authority of gods who were not gods at all, but corporate executives from another world. This grand, all-encompassing narrative is compelling, but it rests on a foundation of translated clay. And that foundation is about to be shaken to its core. For the last several hours of our journey, you have been building a magnificent, sprawling palace of an idea. Its foundations are the myths of Sumer, its walls are the theories of Zacharias Sitchin, and its gilded roof is a unified theory of global history, connecting the pyramids, Puma Punku, and the Vimanas of India. It's a breathtaking structure, one that seems to explain every mystery of the ancient world. But now you must look at the ground on which it's built. The entire edifice, every last claim, rests on one man's interpretation of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay thousands of years ago. And you're about to meet the people who spend their entire lives studying that clay, and who have some serious objections. You find yourself in the hushed, book-lined office of a university's Near Eastern Studies department. There's no dramatic lighting here, no mysterious artifacts on pedestals. There's just the smell of old paper, the gentle hum of a computer, and a scholar, an Assyriologist, hunched over a desk, comparing a high-resolution photograph of a cuneiform tablet to a lexical list that looks like an alien phone book. These are the academic descendants of the men who first cracked the code of cuneiform. Figures like Henry Rawlinson, a real-life Indiana Jones who in the 1840s dangled from ropes down a cliff face in Iran to transcribe the Behistun inscription, a trilingual text that became the Rosetta Stone for Mesopotamian languages. This is a mainstream historical fact. Rawlinson's daring and scholarship were key to unlocking the lost languages of Akkadian, Elamite, and Old Persian, allowing us to read these ancient stories for the first time. The scholars who do this work today are meticulous, cautious, and deeply specialized. And when they look at Sitchin's translations, they don't see a brilliant synthesis. They see a cascade of fundamental errors, a series of linguistic leaps that the evidence simply cannot support. This is their rebuttal, the case of the mistranslated cuneiform. The first and most fundamental disagreement is over the name Anunnaki itself. Sitchin's translation, "Those who from heaven to earth came," is dramatic and forms the bedrock of his entire premise. But mainstream Sumerologists and Akkadian specialists overwhelmingly disagree. They argue that the name is derived from Anu, the sky god, and Na, a genitive suffix, combined with a plural marker. The most accepted scholarly translations are far less spectacular: princely offspring, those of royal seed, or simply the children of Anu. It doesn't imply a journey or a point of origin. It implies a bloodline, a divine social status. It's the difference between calling someone an immigrant and calling them a prince. Both are special, but in very different ways. Next is the linchpin of the entire astronomical theory, Nibiru. For Sitchin, it is unequivocally the 12th planet, the home of the Anunnaki. But in the vast corpus of Mesopotamian astronomical texts, the the name Nibiru is used in a variety of contexts. Most often, it is a name for the planet Jupiter, as it reaches its highest point in the sky, its crossing point. Sometimes, it refers to the planet Mercury. In other contexts, it isn't a planet at all, but a celestial location, the meridian, the point in the sky directly overhead. To a mainstream scholar, Sitchin's insistence that Nibiru is a specific, undiscovered planet is like finding a text that says, the Crossroads, and insisting it must refer to a specific, hidden town named Crossroads, ignoring the fact that it just means an intersection. Then there's the story of Babel and the Shem. Sitchin's translation of Shem as rocket ship is, in the eyes of linguists, completely baseless. The word Shem is one of the most common nouns in ancient Semitic languages. It means name, reputation, fame, or monument. The phrase, let us make a Shem for ourselves, is a standard idiom for becoming famous or leaving a legacy. Sitchin's interpretation, while exciting, ignores centuries of established lexicography for the sake of a good story. It's the ancient equivalent of claiming, let's make a splash, means someone is literally planning to build a water park. The critique goes deeper than individual words. It's about context. Mainstream academics accuse Sitchin of taking myths from different cultures, written hundreds or even thousands of years apart, and treating them as a single, coherent narrative. He quotes a Sumerian poem, then a Babylonian epic, then a Hittite legend, then the Hebrew Bible as if they were all chapters in the same history book, written by the same author. To a historian, this is a cardinal sin. It strips the stories of their unique cultural, political, and religious contexts. A story told in Sumer in 3000 BCE served a very different purpose than a story told in Babylon in 600 BCE. A quirky tidbit about the language itself, cuneiform is an incredibly complex writing system. The same sign can have multiple, completely different meanings depending on the context. A single wedge-based character could be a logogram representing a whole word, like a picture of a star meaning God or heaven, a syllabogram representing a sound like ba, by, or bu, or a determinative, a silent sign that tells you the category of the following word, like a God sign before a name to tell you it's a deity. This ambiguity makes translation a highly skilled process of interpretation. It's a linguistic three-card Monty, and if you're not an expert, it's very easy to get wrong. Historians still argue whether the Hebrew Bible's creation and flood stories were direct copies of Mesopotamian myths, or if both traditions drew from a common, older pool of oral folklore from the ancient Near East. The influence is undeniable, but the exact mechanism of transmission and adaptation is a subject of rich and ongoing scholarly debate. So, where does this leave you? You are standing in the rubble of that beautiful palace of ideas. The academic consensus is clear. Sitchin was a passionate and imaginative storyteller, but his scholarship was flawed, his translations were erroneous, and his grand theory was built on a foundation of misinterpreted words. And yet, the story is so powerful. It feels so cohesive. The academic explanation, while likely correct, feels less satisfying. It replaces a grand, unified conspiracy with a messy, complicated, and often ambiguous history. It replaces gods from outer space with symbolic metaphors and complex socio-religious evolution. The rebuttal is powerful, but it doesn't entirely erase the allure of the myth. And it's this allure that would ensure the Anunnaki, whether real or imagined, would find a new home, not in the sky above, but in the fertile ground of our modern imagination. The academic critique is devastating. The linguistic foundations of Sitchin's grand theory seem to crumble under the weight of peer review. The palace of the Anunnaki astronauts appears to be a mirage, a trick of language and wishful thinking. But an idea, once released into the world, takes on a life of its own. It doesn't need academic validation to thrive. It just needs to be a good story. And the story of the Anunnaki is a very good story. You leave the quiet, skeptical world of the university and dive headfirst into the bright, noisy, and chaotic world of modern popular culture, where the Anunnaki are more alive and influential than ever. The seeds planted by Sitchin and von Daniken in the 1970s have grown into a vast, sprawling jungle of entertainment. The Anunnaki and the broader ancient astronaut theory have become a modern mythology, a shared universe of concepts and characters that writers, filmmakers, and game designers could draw upon. They are the ultimate public domain supervillains and secret benefactors. Your first stop is the cinema. You settle into a plush theater seat, the lights go down, and the screen flickers to life. The 1994 film Stargate is perhaps the most direct and successful popularization of the core Anunnaki concept. It doesn't use the name Anunnaki or Nibiru, but the DNA of the theory is all there. An ancient artifact, a Stargate, is discovered in Egypt. It opens a wormhole to another planet, Abydos. There, a group of human slaves toil under the rule of a powerful, seemingly immortal alien being named Ra, who has taken the guise of the Egyptian sun god. He is a cruel, parasitic entity who visited Earth thousands of years ago, enslaved primitive humans, and transported them to another planet to mine a precious mineral for him. It's the Sitchin narrative with the serial numbers filed off, repackaged as a thrilling sci-fi action movie. The film's success spawned a massive franchise with multiple television series, Stargaze I, Atlantis, Universe, that spent years exploring a galaxy filled with gold, a race of parasitic aliens who pose as the gods of ancient Earth mythologies. The influence doesn't stop there. You see echoes of the Anunnaki in Ridley Scott's Alien prequels, Prometheus and Alien, Covenant. Here, the story is reframed with a more existential horror. Humanity's creators, the godlike engineers, are depicted as pale, beautiful, and terrifyingly amoral giants. They seeded life on Earth as a grand biological experiment, but for some unknown reason, decided to destroy their creation with a horrific biological weapon. The films are steeped in ancient astronaut imagery, from star maps found in prehistoric caves to the idea that our gods were flesh and blood extraterrestrials with their own inscrutable and violent agendas. You wander into a bookstore, the shelves packed with novels. The Anunnaki are a staple of the sci-fi and fantasy genres. They appear as shadowy puppet masters in conspiracy thrillers, as ancient spacefaring ancestors in epic space operas, and as literal gods returning to a modern Earth they no longer recognize. They are a perfect narrative device, allowing authors to blend history, mythology, and science fiction into a potent cocktail. They provide a ready-made backstory for humanity's origins that is both grand and mysterious. Next, you pick up a video game controller. The world of interactive entertainment is perhaps where the Anunnaki legend has found its most fertile soil. The blockbuster Assassin's Creed series is built entirely on a foundation of ancient astronaut lore. In the game's universe, all of human history is a secret war between two factions, the Assassins and the Templars, who are fighting over artifacts left behind by a precursor race. This precursor race, known as the ISU, are technologically advanced beings who created humanity as a workforce and ruled over them as gods. The ISU are a direct analog of the Anunnaki. The game's narrative weaves together historical events, figures, and mythologies, reinterpreting them as part of this ancient, hidden conflict. The Apple of Eden isn't a fruit. It's a powerful ISU artifact. The gods of Greek, Egyptian, and Norse mythology are all revealed to be powerful ISU individuals. A mainstream historical fact, the use of mythology as a source for modern storytelling is as old as storytelling itself. Shakespeare borrowed heavily from Roman and English history and myth. Wagner based his epic Ring cycle on Norse sagas. What's different about the Anunnaki story is that it purports to be nonfiction, which gives it adaptation into fictional media an extra layer of conspiratorial thrill for the audience. A quirky tidbit, the History Channel, once known for documentaries about World War II, found massive success with the series Ancient Aliens, which premiered in 2010 and is still running. The show has become a cultural phenomenon, known for its dramatic narration, its enthusiastic experts, and the iconic, wild-haired proponent Giorgio H. Tsoukalos, whose catchphrase posture, hands outstretched, asking, "Is it possible?" has become a globally recognized internet meme. The show has done more to popularize the Anunnaki and ancient astronaut theories than any book or film, bringing Sitchin's ideas into living rooms around the world every week. Historians and sociologists still argue about why this particular flavor of pseudo-history has become so incredibly popular in the 21st century? Is it a symptom of a growing distrust in traditional institutions and sources of authority, like science and academia? Is it a modern search for meaning, a way to re-enchant a world that feels increasingly sterile and materialistic? Or is it simply that it's more fun? The idea that we are the children of star gods is, for many, a far more compelling and empowering narrative than being the product of random mutation and natural selection. The Anunnaki have completed their final transformation. They have transcended the debate over cuneiform translation. They have survived the critiques of academia. They have moved out of the library and into the multiplex, the bookstore, and the gaming console. They are no longer just a theory. They are a brand. They have become a permanent fixture in our cultural landscape, a modern myth for a technological age. And as it turns out, while our culture was busy absorbing the story of a hidden planet in our solar system, our real-life astronomers were busy looking for one. The Anunnaki have been thoroughly absorbed into the fabric of pop culture, becoming the go-to explanation for every ancient mystery in the fictional worlds we love. But you must now leave the realm of science fiction and return to the quiet, methodical world of actual science. Because while the story of Nibiru as a home for gold-seeking aliens may be fantasy, the hunt for a massive, unseen planet in the dark recesses of our own solar system is very, very real. The scientific search for Planet X is a story of patient observation, complex mathematics, and the tantalizing pull of the unknown. You find yourself at an observatory, perched high on a desolate mountain peak. The air is thin and cold, and the sky above is a velvet blackness sprayed with an impossible number of stars. Inside the dome, a giant telescope, a marvel of modern engineering, hums quietly as it peers into the void. This is the front line in the legitimate, scientific search for a ninth planet. The story begins back in the 19th century. After the discovery of Uranus in 1781, astronomers noticed that its orbit wasn't quite right. It wobbled, straying from the path predicted by Newtonian physics. The French astronomer Urbain Le Verrier hypothesized that this was because the gravity of another, more distant planet was tugging on it. In 1846, using only mathematics, he predicted the location of this unseen world. When astronomers in Berlin pointed their telescopes to that exact spot, they found it. The planet was Neptune. It was one of the most stunning triumphs of theoretical physics in history. But the story didn't end there. Even after accounting for Neptune, there were still tiny, lingering anomalies in the orbits of both Uranus and Neptune. The hunt was on for a Planet X, a term coined by astronomer Percival Lowell, who dedicated the later part of his life to finding it. This search led directly to the discovery of Pluto in 1930 by a young astronomer named Clyde Tombaugh at the Lowell Observatory. A mainstream historical fact, Tombaugh found Pluto by painstakingly comparing photographic plates of the night sky taken days apart, looking for any tiny star that had moved against the background of fixed stars. It was an incredibly laborious process. Pluto, however, was a disappointment. It was far too small to have any significant gravitational effect on the gas giants. For decades, Planet X remained a phantom. The mystery of the orbital wobbles was eventually solved in the 1990s when the Voyager 2 spacecraft flew past Neptune and gave us a much more accurate measurement of its mass. It turned out Neptune was slightly less massive than we thought, and once this new value was plugged into the equations, the anomalies disappeared. The original case for Planet X was closed, but just as one door closed, another, much stranger one opened. In the early 2000s, astronomers began discovering a whole new class of objects out beyond Neptune, in a vast icy debris field known as the Kuiper Belt. These were trans-Neptunian objects, or TNOs, small, frozen worlds like Sedna, Eris, and the Goblin. And they were behaving very strangely. A handful of the most distant of these TNOs all shared bizarre, highly elliptical orbits that were clustered together in one quadrant of the solar system, as if they were being shepherded by the gravity of something huge and unseen. This brings you to 2016. Two astronomers at Caltech, Mike Brown, ironically, the man most famous for killing Pluto by discovering Eris and forcing its reclassification as a dwarf planet, and Konstantin Batygin, published a groundbreaking paper. They had run computer simulations to try and explain the weird clustering of these TNOs. The best explanation, they argued, was the presence of a massive, undiscovered planet, a true Planet 9. According to their models, this Planet 9 is not a Nibiruan fantasy. It's a cold, dark world, likely a super-Earth or a mini-Neptune, about 5 to 10 times the mass of our own planet. Its orbit is enormous, taking it on a journey that lasts between 10,000 and 20,000 years, hundreds of times farther from the Sun than Earth. It's not crossing between Mars and Jupiter. It's lurking in the vast, frozen darkness of the outer solar system, its presence revealed only by its subtle gravitational influence on the tiny ice worlds that drift at the edge of the Sun's reach. The announcement electrified the astronomical community. The hunt for Planet X was back on, and this time the evidence was compelling. Observatories around the world, like the Subaru telescope in Hawaii, are now engaged in a systematic search of the patch of sky where Brown and Batygin's calculations predict the planet should be. It's a monumental task. The planet is incredibly far away, and therefore incredibly faint. Finding it is like trying to spot a single black marble on a football field at night, using only a flashlight. A quirky tidbit: Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin have affectionately nicknamed their hypothetical world Fatty. If and when it's found, it will be given a proper mythological name by the International Astronomical Union, following the tradition for all celestial bodies. Given its distant, gloomy nature, a name from an underworld deity seems likely. Historians and scientists still argue about the best way to conduct the search. Some favor the brute force method of scanning the sky with powerful telescopes. Others believe we might find it indirectly, by looking for its gravitational influence on other bodies, or perhaps through future, more advanced sky surveys like the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, which will photograph the entire visible sky every few nights. So here you are, at the cutting edge of planetary science, and the situation is wonderfully ironic. Zacharias Sitchin, the man whose work was dismissed by the scientific community, based his entire theory on the existence of a large, undiscovered planet with a long elliptical orbit. And now, decades later, mainstream astronomy is actively searching for a large, undiscovered planet with a long elliptical orbit. The details are, of course, completely different. The orbit is in the wrong place. The timescale is wrong. And there is absolutely no scientific evidence to suggest it harbors life, let alone advanced alien miners with a gold fetish. But the conceptual overlap is undeniable, and it gives the ancient astronaut theory a veneer of modern scientific plausibility that keeps it alive. It allows a believer to point to the work of Brown and Batygin and say, "You see, they're finally admitting it exists." It's a case of two completely different paths, one of mythological interpretation, the other of gravitational mathematics, arriving at a superficially similar destination. And it forces you to ask one final question. Why? Why are we so desperate to believe? The telescope in the cold, dark dome continues its silent, patient scan of the heavens. The search for Planet 9 goes on, a testament to our relentless curiosity. But the search for the Anunnaki, the gods from that planet, is a different kind of quest. It's not about finding a faint point of light in the sky. It's about finding a sense of place and purpose in our own history. You now turn your focus away from the cosmos and inward into the complex, often contradictory landscape of the human mind. Why do we need gods from space? Why does the ancient astronaut theory, despite the academic rebuttals and the lack of hard evidence, remain so profoundly compelling to so many people? The first and most powerful reason is that it provides a neat, simple solution to very big, complicated questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? How did ancient civilizations build such incredible monuments? Religion, mythology, and science all offer their own answers, but they can be complex, ambiguous, or demand a leap of faith. The ancient astronaut theory cuts through all of this like a laser. It offers a single, elegant answer that feels both scientific and epic. We were created by advanced aliens. They built the pyramids. We are here to serve them. It's a story that is easy to grasp, satisfyingly comprehensive, and provides a clear narrative thread through the messy tangle of human history. This ties into a deep-seated psychological need for what some call cosmic parenting. The idea that we are not alone, that we are the children of older, wiser, and more powerful beings, can be incredibly comforting. The universe, as revealed by science, is a vast, cold, and seemingly indifferent place. We are the product of random chance, a brief flicker of consciousness on a tiny speck of dust in an incomprehensible void. This can be a terrifying and alienating thought. The ancient astronaut theory replaces this cosmic loneliness with a family reunion. It tells us we are part of a galactic story, that our existence has a purpose, even if that purpose was originally just to be a workforce. It re-enchants the world, making us feel special again. There is also an element of intellectual humility, or perhaps a lack thereof, at play. When we look at structures like Puma Punku or the Great Pyramid, it can be difficult for some to accept that our primitive ancestors could have achieved such feats. A quirky tidbit, this is sometimes referred to as chronocondescension, the unconscious assumption that people in the past were less intelligent or less capable than we are today. To say they couldn't have built this on their own is to underestimate the ingenuity and sheer, bloody-minded determination of ancient peoples. The theory that aliens did it can, paradoxically, be both a celebration of a grander history and a subtle diminishing of our own ancestors' very real and very impressive accomplishments. The theory also taps into a powerful anti-establishment and conspiratorial impulse. The narrative is not just that aliens visited us. It's that the government, academia, the powers that be, are hiding the truth from us. This feeling of possessing secret knowledge, of being an insider who has seen past the official story, is incredibly seductive. It creates a sense of community among believers, a tribe of enlightened individuals who are brave enough to challenge the dogma of mainstream science and history. In an age of declining trust in institutions, the Anunnaki story offers a compelling alternative narrative where the individual, through their own research, can uncover a truth more profound than anything taught in schools. A mainstream historical fact. The idea of a lost golden age of wisdom and high technology is a recurring theme in human history. The Greek myth of Atlantis, as told by Plato, described a powerful and advanced civilization that was swallowed by the sea. For centuries, people have searched for this lost city, seeing it as the source of all ancient wisdom. The ancient astronaut theory is, in many ways, a modern science fiction retelling of the Atlantis myth, with Nibiru taking the place of the sunken island. Furthermore, the Anunnaki story provides a fascinating out for the problem of evil and divine imperfection. In traditional Western religions, it can be difficult to reconcile an all-powerful, all-loving God with a world full of suffering, violence, and chaos. But if your gods are not perfect, omniscient beings, but a group of flawed, squabbling, often immoral alien scientists and colonial administrators, then the state of the world makes a lot more sense. Of course, there's war and suffering. It's because Enlil and Enki were constantly at each other's throats. Of course, humanity is a mess of contradictions. We are a genetically engineered hybrid of a primitive hominid and a highly advanced but deeply dysfunctional alien species. It explains our divine spark and our animalistic urges in one fell swoop. We were designed by a committee, and the project managers hated each other. Historians and psychologists still argue about the long-term cultural impact of these beliefs. Do they encourage a healthy skepticism toward authority, or do they foster a dangerous disregard for evidence-based reasoning and expertise? Do they open our minds to new possibilities, or do they lead us down rabbit holes of unfalsifiable fantasy? There is no simple answer. Ultimately, the reason we need gods from space is because it's the greatest story ever told, refitted for a modern age. It has everything: cosmic wars, family drama, forbidden love, advanced technology, secret conspiracies, and a direct personal connection to our own origins. It gives us a past that is more exciting than the history books and a future that is filled with the tantalizing possibility of a grand return. It's a story that places humanity at the very center of a galactic drama. Whether the Anunnaki ever really existed is, in some ways, secondary to the power of the story they have come to represent. It's a myth for the space age, and it speaks to our deepest hopes and fears about our place in the universe. You pull back from the heady realm of modern psychology and pop culture, back from the search for meaning, and return to the land between the two rivers. But it is not the Sumer of 3000 BCE, bustling with the invention of civilization. It is a much later, dustier Mesopotamia. The great empires have risen and fallen. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, they have all washed over this land, each leaving their own layer of law, language, and gods. The Anunnaki, if they were ever here, are long, long gone. Even their memory has faded, their names subsumed into new pantheons or forgotten entirely. You find yourself in a silent, crumbling city in the final centuries BCE. The world has moved on. The Greek alphabet, so much simpler and more efficient than the intricate web of cuneiform, has become the new language of scholarship and commerce. You see a lonely, elderly scribe, perhaps one of the very last of his kind, sitting not in a grand temple courtyard, but in a small, dusty room. He is painstakingly copying an old astronomical text onto a fresh clay tablet. It's a tradition, nothing more. He is preserving the old ways, but he knows he is an anachronism. His own children probably speak Aramaic and Greek, and they find his obsession with these old wedge marks quaint, if not a little sad. He's the historical equivalent of a man who still insists on writing everything in Latin. It's beautiful, but its time has passed. This is how a world ends. Not with a bang or a flood, but with a quiet fading. The younger generation simply find a more convenient way to do things, and the old knowledge, once the absolute bedrock of civilization, is left to turn to dust. The last known and datable cuneiform tablet we have ever found is an astronomical almanac from 75 CE. This is a mainstream historical fact. After that, the knowledge was lost completely. The ability to read the stories of Gilgamesh, of Inanna's descent, of the creation of the Adamu, vanished from the human mind for nearly 1800 years, waiting silently in the buried libraries of Iraq. You watch the old scribe finish his work and place the tablet on a shelf, where it will lie forgotten until a future archaeologist with a sun helmet and a shovel carefully brushes the dirt from its surface. The entire epic, the grand drama of Enlil and Enki, the quest for gold, the rebellion of the Igigi, the coming of Nibiru, it all comes down to this. Grooved mud, buried under more mud. So, where does that leave you at the end of this long night's journey? You are left standing on a precipice between two colossal stories. On one side is the story of history and archaeology. It's a story of human ingenuity, of environmental adaptation, of slow, patient progress. In this version, the Anunnaki are the gods of a powerful and sophisticated religion, metaphors for the terrifying forces of nature. The myths are brilliant psychological explorations of creation, justice, and the human condition. The pyramids were built by organized, well-fed, and highly motivated human laborers. The strange symbols are art. It's a complex, nuanced, and evidence-based story built piece by piece from the careful translation of texts and the meticulous excavation of ruins. On the other side is the story of Zechariah Sitchin. It's a story of alien intervention, genetic engineering, and a secret history hidden in plain sight. In this version, the Anunnaki are flesh and blood astronauts. The myths are historical records. The pyramids were built with advanced technology. The strange symbols are diagrams of that technology. It is a grand, sweeping, all-encompassing narrative that explains every mystery with a single. And I saw heaven open, and behold a white horse. And he that sat on him was called Faithful and True. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven followed him. Out of his mouth went a sharp sword, with which to smite nations, And on his vesture and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is the vision recorded in the last book of the Bible, Revelation. A prophecy of a divine return, a powerful being descending from heaven, not as a gentle savior, but as a warrior, a judge, a king. The return of the Messiah. The prophesied second coming. Every great religion carries within it an echo of the coming from above. The Jews have waited for their Messiah for thousands of years. Christians await the return of Jesus. The world, in its chaos, division, and transformation, seems to be holding its breath, waiting. But could these expectations be the echo of a truth much older than the scriptures themselves? The Bible speaks of powerful entities, Elohim, mighty ones who descended from the heavens. Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, feared and revered, was not alone. And this is a fact for those who study ancient civilizations. He was one of them. The Anunnaki, the architects of civilization, were here on earth at that time. And then there was Jesus. Some believe he carried the blood of the gods within him, the royal lineage, the sacred heritage. When he spoke of sacrificing his blood at the Last Supper, was it merely a symbol of sacrifice or a mysterious reference to the saying real, the Holy Grail? Did he invite us to remember not only his death, but also the bloodline of the ancient gods that flowed through his veins? There are several clues that have never left. Perhaps they have simply retreated, moved behind the curtain of human history, and are waiting for the moment to return. Recently, there have been signs in the sky, tremors in nature, and a growing sense of unease is spreading throughout the world. The world seems to be in a spiral of disorder. Many are beginning to say that the time has come, that the old orders are crumbling, that when the old gods return, no religion will stand. They are all doomed. If the old gods were not a myth, but beings of flesh and blood, rulers who once walked among humans, what will happen when they return? Will they come as saviors or as conquerors? And if the power that once ruled the ancient world returns, how will the modern world survive? Get ready, because everything we thought we knew is about to change. Signals. They are everywhere, and I have no doubt that the gods are returning. Across every ancient tradition, there is a common expectation, the return of powerful beings who once walked among humanity. Whether called Messiah, Savior, Redeemer, or King, this figure is always destined to return. From Judaism to the expected, from Messiah to the second coming of Christianity, from the Islamic Mahdi and Isa to the Hindu Kalki and the Buddhist Maitreya, the message transcends name and nation. Someone from heaven will come again. But it's not just about faith, it's about reconciliation. Heaven has always been a realm gods, and the ancients knew it. From the great pyramids of Giza to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, ancient monuments weren't just tombs or temples, they were cosmic markers. They pointed to solstices and equinoxes, to rising stars and planetary conjunctions. They weren't just seasonal guides. They were countdowns, clocks carved into stone. For the ancients, time moved in cycles, not linear but spiraling. They believed that every few millennia the heavens signaled convergences, moments when divine intelligence returned to human affairs. The priest astronomers watched the skies not for myths, but for messages. These are not legends. They were codes of return, engraved in stars and stone. And humanity, whether consciously or not, echoes this ancient expectation. There is a rhythm to history. The same fears, the same revelations, the same promises. Today, celestial signs once again dominate the headlines. Astronomical alignments echo ancient prophecies. And once buried names, Anunnaki, Elohim watchers, have reappeared in both scientific texts and popular imagination. Not just as stories, but as reawakening memories. The reawakening began with the rediscovery of ancient Mesopotamian tablets. When the libraries of Nineveh were discovered, when the cuneiform script was deciphered and the names of the gods were spoken again, something shifted. The old stories of creators from the sky, beings who came not in spirit but in physical form, re-entered our world. The ancients said that their gods pointed to the stars, and they named the constellations and the heavens as their origin. From Sumer to Egypt, these were not vague allegories. They were cosmic directions. And then they were gone. The divine presence, once tangible, faded into legend. The gods who once ruled from the heavens and shaped the fate of humanity withdrew. But their withdrawal left behind a vacuum and a prophecy. The belief in return is etched into cultures around the world. A sacred rhythm that promises that what once was will be again. And so the cycle turns again. What we call rediscovery may actually be reactivation. The more we remember, the more they return, not in fleets or temples, but in symbols and whispers, in the very shifting of time. The ancient clock ticks. The marks align. Somewhere behind the veil of myth, fate stirs. The gods will return. But before that, we must remember that they once walked among us. And they left. For a reason. At the heart of ancient texts lies a moment of devastating finality, a time when the gods, broken and weary, they left Earth behind. One of the most cataclysmic events associated with their departure centers on the unleashing of nuclear destruction, a forgotten war between divine factions. In these tales, Enlil, one of the most powerful leaders of the Anunnaki, decided to leave Earth after witnessing the desecration wrought by celestial weapons. The plains of Sumer became wastelands. The cities evaporated. What was once the cradle of civilization became the scars of divine conflict. Yet not all the gods departed. Some, especially the descendants and supporters of Enki, Enlil's half-brother, remained. Babylon rose in this vacuum not as a remnant of a collapsed world, but as a beacon of continuing divine influence. In its towering ziggurats, intricate mythologies, and ritual devotions, we do not find a civilization in decline, but one still under the watchful eye of its gods. Babylon became the seat of power for those Anunnaki who refused to relinquish their power on Earth. For them, Earth was no longer just a base, it became home. And with home came the desire to maintain order, control, and lineage. Some believe that to administer this dominion, the gods implanted their essence into human bloodlines. Emissaries and hybrids, genetically modified or crossbred, walked among us. Not as mythical beings, but as indistinguishable from any other human. Their task, to influence, to oversee, to ensure the continuation of an ancient plan. Echoes of this divine presence linger in some of the most mysterious texts of the ancient world. One of the most striking accounts comes from by the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel. During the Babylonian exile, near the river Chebar, Ezekiel described a vision that defies modern explanation. He saw a stormy wind approaching from the north, a mighty cloud flashing with fire and surrounded by a brilliant light. In it are for living creatures that look like a man, each accompanied by wheels within wheels. These wheels, described as glistening like beryl, could move in any direction without turning. Their movement was accompanied by a thunderous roar, like the roaring of waters or a mighty army. What Ezekiel witnessed was not a metaphor. He did not imagine angels flying in the clouds. It was a technological encounter, carefully described in the language of his time. Today, such a vision is eerily consistent with reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, metallic vessels capable of multidirectional movement, emitting tremendous sound, and operating beyond the limits of known physics. Ezekiel, the priest of Yahweh, saw something he could not fully understand, but he recorded it in stunning detail. And in doing so, he gave us one of the clearest windows into the possibility that the gods or their messengers, they didn't leave completely, or that they left only to return at a set hour. So did they really leave? Or did they just disappear from our conscious awareness? Perhaps their withdrawal was strategic. It allowed their influence to shift from direct rule to indirect control. a slow transition from overt presence to covert guardianship. In this light, the timeline of human history becomes less about evolution and more about orchestration. The gods may have left the stage, but they have left their agents behind. And now, as the celestial signs rearrange and the old prophecies are mixed, the ancient watchers may be preparing to make themselves known again. The silence was never an abandonment. It was a preparation. To understand the silence that followed, to understand the nature of this so-called divine withdrawal, we must first look back, deep into the events that led up to it. For the gods did not simply disappear for no reason. Their departure was preceded by centuries of escalating tension, strategic manipulation, and battles not only of armies but also of ideologies and of celestial rivalry. Before the silence came struggle. And at the heart of this struggle was a battle for supremacy, not just over territories or civilizations, but over the very soul of humanity. After a great celestial conflict that scarred the ancient world, the power vacuum left gave rise to new empires associated with divine plants. Marduk, the ambitious son of Enki, quickly rose. With Babylon as his base, he declared himself supreme and demanded loyalty not only from mortals but from the divine pantheon itself. Babylon. It was not chosen by chance. It became a manifestation of his dominance, a city filled with his ideology and divine architecture, intended to rival the ancient centers of power of the Enlilites. Among Marduk's great ambitions was the construction of the Tower of Babel. This enormous ziggurat was more than just an architectural marvel. It was intended as a gateway to the heavens, a direct challenge to the divine order established by the older gods. It symbolized humanity's attempt, perhaps encouraged by Marduk, to restore open communication with the stars. But the project was abruptly halted, and the scattering of languages may have been an attempt by rival factions to break Marduk's unity and limit his rise. Marduk's rise, however, was not without opposition. He was opposed by the remnants of Enlil's camp, who saw his ascension as a threat to the divine order. For these faithful, Jerusalem became a new command center, a sacred mission control guarded by people like Shamash, Inanna, and other divine entities still associated with Enlil. While Babylon represented rebellion and reform, Jerusalem embodied tradition and control. And it was in this duality that humanity found itself, caught and unwittingly carried out the plans of the gods. Enter Abraham. His story, preserved in sacred texts, is often portrayed as a spiritual awakening. But beneath the religious narrative lies a deeper reality. Abraham was likely Enlil's chosen emissary. His loyalty was not only spiritual, it was genetic, geopolitical, and celestial. But who else could have been behind his mission? Perhaps it was Nansen, the moon god, divine ruler of Ur and Haran, Abraham's own homeland, and a deity closely associated with the line of Enlil. Through his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, the ancient Anunnaki division would rebound and spread into the human lineage. Isaac's descendants would become the Israelites, Enlil's chosen people. Ishmael would beget the great Arab nations, potentially influenced by another faction or ideology that challenged the original order. This division was no accident. It was a continuation of the celestial schism, transcribed into human bloodlines. But there were other players in the shadows. The Igigi, once subservient observers who rebelled in the earliest ages. They did not disappear. Some texts suggest that after their initial rebellion, they splintered into subgroups with competing goals. Some of them were no longer content with servitude and may have become independent agents, aligning themselves with Marduk or Enlil, or pursuing their own hidden goals. Their presence can explain anomalies in historical record, unexplained interventions, sudden rises and falls of kings, strange visions reported by prophets and mystics. Figures like Cyrus the Great are often viewed only through the lens of human history. Yet his unexpected tolerance of the Jews, his conquest of Babylon with minimal resistance, and his recognition in the Hebrew scriptures as the Anointed One suggest that he may have been carrying out more than a political strategy. Perhaps he was fulfilling a divine mandate. Cyrus's his meteoric rise from a regional prince to ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever seen was not simply the result of military prowess. It reflected orchestration that transcended human planning. By overthrowing the Neo-Babylonian Empire and issuing an edict of restoration, he overturned Marduk's. He regained control of key religious sites in accordance with Enlil's legacy. Most notably, he allowed the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. This act placed him as a liberator under divine support, perhaps led by a faction loyal to Enlil, who was trying to reclaim influence. His policies of religious tolerance, administrative organization, and symbolic gestures, such as the worship of Marduk to appease Babylonian sentiments, demonstrate a calculated balance between human rule and heavenly devotion. Cyrus' actions seen through the lens of Anunnaki policies reflect a strategic balance of power on Earth, where divine factions continued to wage war not through fire and thunder, but through thrones, revenues, and bloodlines. Nabonidus, on the other hand, represents a profound anomaly. As the last native king of Babylon and a potential descendant of the Sargonid Assyrian dynasty through his mother Adad-Gupi, a devoted priestess of the moon god Sin, his reign marked a revival of the ancient lunar cult associated with the Enlil lineage. His intense devotion to Nana Sin, especially through the rebuilding of the Kolkal temple in Haran and his voluntary exile to Tama, far from the center of power, raised questions about celestial loyalties and hidden directives. By reducing Marduk's role and elevating Sin, Nabonidus may have been attempting to restore the suppressed divine order, thereby challenging the authority of Marduk, a representative of Enki's lineage. This religious upheaval, combined with political instability and the controversial absence of the king in Babylon, weakened the empire internally. It left Babylon vulnerable. Just in time for Cyrus the Great, perhaps acting on behalf of a rival divine faction, to conquer it with minimal resistance. Such a confluence of religious and political events strongly suggests that Nabonidus was a critical piece on a larger, ordered cosmic chessboard that was being manipulated. Divine players with ancient scores to settle. Then there's Alexander the Great. After covering vast distances and conquering empires, he entered Babylon, the heart of Marduk's power, where he died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Ancient sources debate whether it was poison, fever, or divine retribution. But the timing and location are suspect. In his final days, Alexander sought to rebuild the great Enigmatic, an ancient ziggurat associated with Marduk, and his goal was to restore the city's divine grandeur in the hope of gaining divine favor. But Marduk, some believe, was already dead, and Babylon no longer had its heavenly protector. Was Alexander's death the result of an attempt to revive the legacy of the fallen god? Agents targeted him. Marduk's enemies, who feared the reactivation of the ancient power of Babylon. Or was he manipulated by another divine faction, seeking to regain influence by ensuring that the ancient balance of power was not upset? In the Anunnaki context, Alexander's death in Babylon not only the end of an empire, but perhaps also the silencing of a final, desperate act to awaken the sleeping god. These events, often explained by political or military logic, take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of divine manipulation. Perhaps these famous figures were more than kings. They were pawns, champions, or victims in a hidden celestial conflict played out on Earth's stage. Ancient warfare also holds secrets that are rarely explored. Stories of flying chariots in India, Vimanas capable of emitting beams of light and unleashing firestorms, are often dismissed as myth. But what if they were memories of aerial combat, of advanced technology used by a divine faction at a time when humans had no context to describe what they saw? And then there's the Ark. Conventions. Revered and feared, it brought death to those who touched it, leveled walls, and had to be handled with ritual precision. Could it be a relic of the gods, a weapon powered by radioactive or unknown energy, mistaken for a divine presence? These are no coincidences. The wars of the ancient world, wars between Babylon and Jerusalem, between empires and bloodlines, were not merely political. They were strategic moves in a long-running interstellar conflict. And as the gods prepared to disappear from the stage, ensured that their factions, bloodlines, and technologies would remain. For even in their silence, the war continued. And amidst the silence, perhaps Enki did not remain inactive. Unlike Enlil's overt tactics of treaty and conquest, Enki may have decided to preserve it. Whispers of hidden schools, arcane traditions, and esoteric orders suggest that ancient knowledge was not lost, but deliberately veiled, preserved by secrecy rather than power. These sacred threads may trace back to Enki's influence, a hidden legacy woven into the fabric of human enlightenment, awaiting rediscovery in the Age of Awakening. And as these shadow wars continued beneath the surface of recorded history, between bloodlines, cities, and empires, something else began to shift. Not only did the battles between gods lead on earthly soil, but the spiritual systems born of these struggles began to crystallize into the religions we know today. They were not simply systems of worship, but instruments of alignment, instruments of divine geopolitics. Each bore the imprint of a god, factions, celestial ideologies. Each faith became an earthly embassy of the celestial order. And so religion became the last and most enduring weapon of the gods. But what happens when the architects of these religions return? There is an apocalyptic fear in almost all major traditions, collective. The expectation of the collapse of the world as we know it. Christianity calls it the Second Coming and Judgment Day. Judaism prophesies the coming of the Messiah and the final battle against Gog and Magog. Islam awaits the descent of Isa and the rise of the Mahdi. Zoroastrians predict the coming of the Saoshyants. In each version, the old order is crumbling and a new one is emerging. But what if these end times are not just moral considerations or spiritual metaphors? What if they are cosmic cycles, ritualistic reminders of return? Many of these eschatological visions are associated with signs in the heavens, eclipses, 1478s, planetary alignments, or the approach of a mysterious celestial body. This body has a name in ancient Sumerian texts, Nibiru, planet of crossings. It was said to come in cycles. Its return meant shaking of empires, shaking of the earth, burning of the skies. Some believe that Nibiru is the true home of the Anunnaki. Others see it as a mythical cipher for their return. Whether a rogue planet or an archetypal harbinger, Nibiru is the gravitational center of a deeper truth, that history moves in loops, and the gods do not stay away forever. This is no marginal speculation. Archaeological analysis of the ruins on Mount Megiddo, Har Megiddo, reveals more than just the foundations of ancient cities. They reveal a strategic convergence point where battles were fought repeatedly for thousands of years. 20. Layers of conquest, fire, and reconstruction. This hill is not a metaphor. It is a memory. And the word Armageddon was born. What Scripture sees as prophecy, the earth remembers as repetition. And when the gods return, no religion will survive. Because these systems were never divine revelations, they were alliances, covenants of loyalty and control, political plans created by celestial factions to expand their influence on human society. Every prophet, every scripture, every sacred law was a mirror of the Anunnaki agenda. That is why religions contradict each other, because they were never meant to unite, but to divide, to mark territory, to claim souls as empires once claimed land. Perhaps the greatest suppressed truth of all lies in the third secret of Fatima. In 1917, 3 shepherd children in Portugal reported visions they believed were from the Virgin Mary. But the third message was hidden, sealed by the Vatican, and only partially released decades later. What was told to the world? It was mild, moral, almost banal. But high-ranking church insiders admitted it was too disturbing for the public. Why? Because it might not have come from Mary at all. What if the apparitions were not divine, but extraterrestrial? What if the message was a warning, not about spiritual sin, but a cosmic reset? a return, a reckoning, one that would tear down every theological edifice humanity has built. Because the apocalypse is not destruction, it is revelation, the lifting of the veil, the collapse not of civilization, but of illusion. When we discover that our gods were not abstractions nor metaphors, but tangible beings, technological, powerful, flawed, everything changes. Every altar crumbles. Every myth is destroyed by memory. At that moment, doctrines will break. Believers will be orphaned from their faith. The question will no longer be, who is the true God, but who created us and why? This is the collapse of religion and the beginning of a global awakening. Because the gods are not coming to validate our religions. They are going to end them. And if the destruction of religious foundations signals the beginning of a spiritual reckoning, then a deeper question arises. Has the return begun? Not with thunder, not with spectacle, but with silence. From the ruins of forgotten temples and encrypted vaults of hidden knowledge, two possibilities arise. One, that the gods never truly left. Their temples may have collapsed, but their influence was not extinguished, it was transferred. The divine voices that once thundered from mountaintops now whisper through the corridors of power. Bloodlines became dynasties. Priesthoods became secret societies. Ziggurats became council chambers. And the ancient covenant of divine rule continued, not through prophecy, but through politics. They do not rule from the heavens, but through the institutions that govern nations and shape minds. In this view, the return is not future. It is now slowly unfolding in the shadows. The second possibility is more terrifying, that they have indeed left, at least physically. But they are watching. From above, from within, from the edges of perception, through technology that mask their presence and the cloaked craft that dance just below the radar. From orbit or perhaps from dimensions yet unknown to human science, they watch in silence. Not absent, not idle, but patient, waiting for the threshold, technological, psychological, or spiritual, that signals our readiness, not to accept salvation, but to choose allegiance. And the evidence is mounting. From military radar records and declassified government files to trusted informants and commanders, we now have documentation of objects that defy known laws of physics. These are not myths. These are metrics so solid, proven. A craft moving at hypersonic speeds, changing direction instantly, and exhibiting intelligence. U.S. Space Command and allied networks have recorded them. Official. The stories feign ignorance, but insiders whisper a deeper truth. The observers are already here. Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Minister of Defense, was one of the first high-level insiders to spoke out. He claimed that aliens had been visiting Earth for millennia, and some may be working with governments. This was no conspiracy. It was the confession of a man with the highest vetting and nothing he could gain. His message was clear. They never left. And he was not alone. Many former military officers, intelligence officers, and senior officials have come forward with similar claims, each reinforcing the idea that extraterrestrial entities are not only watching us, but are among us. Throughout human history, we have observed unexplained lights in the sky, disks over ancient battlefields, and mysterious encounters across all cultures and ages. UAPs, UFOs, and strange phenomena have been documented for centuries, often dismissed or misunderstood. But together these signs form a compelling mosaic, one that suggests a continuing presence, monitoring, influencing, and perhaps even leading. The message is clear. They may never have truly left. But how would the gods return? Not with golden chariots in the sky, but through infiltration. Through carefully placed proxies, hybrids, bloodline administrators embedded in every sphere of civilization, science, politics, finance, media. If even some of the theories are true, then not all of us are fully human. Ancient genetics may be walking the earth in modern skins, hidden heirs to a forgotten war. And if that is true, then one name stands above all others in mystery, power, and potential: Jesus. A name so central, so radiant in human consciousness, that to question it seems like blasphemy. But let's peel back the doctrine and examine the data. The name Jesus is a transliteration of Yeshua or Yehoshua, salvation of Yahweh. But who was Yahweh? Ancient Semitic and Mesopotamian texts suggest that he was not a universal god, but a territorial Elohim, a commander among the Anunnaki. If this is accurate, then Jesus was not only his servant, but potentially his descendant. Not just a prophet, but a bearer of the heavenly bloodline, chosen not just for his wisdom or compassion, but also for what ran through his veins. And in texts excluded from the canon, like the Gospel of Judas and other Gnostic scrolls, we see another Jesus emerge. One who was not betrayed, but enlightened. One who understood the war between stars. The one who had knowledge forbidden by orthodoxy. Here in the channel, we have a whole video dedicated to the Gospel of Judas, exploring its deeper meaning and implications. At the end of this video, there will be a direct link to the documentary The Gospel of Judas. Don't miss it. This reframes the Last Supper. When Jesus held up the bread and wine and said, "This is my body, this is my blood," was he performing a ritual? Or was he revealing the truth? The Sangreal, the Holy Grail, was not a cup. It was a bloodline, a royal line of union between the divine and the human. Inheritance of the gods passed through human vessels. In ancient Semitic and Mesopotamian traditions, Yahweh is not depicted as a universal deity of love and wisdom, but as a warrior god, the Lord of hosts, a self-confessed jealous god. His methods were conquest, justice, and retribution. In contrast, Jesus' message was one of peace, compassion, and inner transformation. This contrast suggests that while his name invoked Yahweh, his teachings may have reflected another divine voice, perhaps even Enki, known for his wisdom, healing, and love for humanity. This possibility opens up a new dimension of understanding. Was Jesus the true heir of Yahweh, or a secret emissary of Enki? On our channel, we delve into these mysteries through our dedicated playlist on the Jesus mystery. Be sure to explore it to uncover layers that history and doctrine have obscured. In this light, Jesus was not just a savior, he was a bridge, a hybrid, a messenger of continuity between the divine and the human, between ancient gods and their future heirs. And that is the secret that institutional religion fears most. Not because it is blasphemous, but because it threatens control. If humanity were to discover that divine blood survives in human form, that the gods did not die, but developed their presence through living lineages, the whole edifice of priesthood and papal thrones would collapse. But the hints are there, in the sealed bloodlines of European royalty, in the symbolism of secret societies, in esoteric teachings, shrouded under empires. The Sangreal was never lost. It was hidden, protected. It was passed down from generation to generation, waiting for the day when the truth could no longer be held. So we must ask, who really rules this world? Who whispers to presidents and kings? Who manipulates global events from shadows older than nations? Who walks beside us with the blood of the gods? Perhaps the return has already begun. Not in thunder, but in blood. But if the bloodline survives, if the ancient watchers never truly left, then one final question must be asked. What happens when the silence ends? For centuries, their return has been a whisper, a trace, a shadow moving along the edges of human history. Perception. Precisely edged crop circles. Lights in the sky that dance against physics. Whispers of informants, ancient records, and genetic echoes in our veins. But now, all signs point to an imminent threshold. One not just spiritual or symbolic, but visible, measurable, undeniable. A moment of revelation. It won't be like the fables we've been told. The return of the gods won't come veiled in metaphor or religious ritual. It will be direct, unmovable. A confrontation with a truth older than any scripture, a truth that will force humanity to see the divine not as myth but as memory, not as abstractions but as ancestors. When the Anunnaki finally reveal themselves visibly, infallibly, the age of faith will break. Theologies built on abstraction and miracles will crumble under the weight of concrete presence. How could the church claim absolute? What if the being once called God has stepped out of body and knowledge as an entity? What if Yahweh returns not from heaven, but from orbit? The consequences will be immediate and profound. Religion will be divided. Some will declare the visitors demons, others will throw themselves into a new deification. Ideological wars will erupt as doctrines collapse under the pressure of reality. Nations will also face crisis. Power structures built on religious and historical legitimacy will be revealed as human interpretations of a much larger cosmic drama. And yet, perhaps this collapse is part of the plan. Those who study the signs suggest that the gods, or those who represent them, have been preparing us. Not through invasion, but initiation. Crop circles that map advanced. Mathematics. Media saturated with alien imagery. Governments slowly releasing once secret data. Growing cultural acceptance that we are not alone. These are not accidents. They are soft revelations, calibrated not to shock but to shift. The gods understand our psychology. They know that. The revelation must be gradual, or it will break us. And so they plant the truth in dreams, symbols, technology, and even genetic memory, until humanity can face the mirror without turning away. Because when the veil finally lifts, when the ships descend, or the voices speak, or the forms will emerge from the sky, we will no longer ask, do they exist? Instead, we will ask, who are we? Where do we come from? And what will happen next? The old order will end. A new era will begin. Man is not built on blind faith, but on cosmic truth. Not on division, but on awakening. We will enter a new paradigm of cosmic consciousness, the realization that our existence is just a fragment of a vast, interconnected galactic story. The gods will not return just to rule. They will return to remind, to reframe our place in the universe, to offer us a seat at the cosmic table, should we choose to evolve and embrace it. And if the moment of revelation approaches, we must prepare not only for contact but also for conflict. For the war never ended. It only changed form. What began as an open rivalry between the gods became a secret competition between their human representatives. Temples became thrones, then palaces, then parliaments. Divine directives filtered into political agendas. The celestial battle for Earth moved from the heavens to the systems that govern our world. And echoes of this ancient struggle still shape every global power play today. Nations rise and fall in patterns that reflect more than geopolitics. They reflect ancient allegiances. The fault lines in our societies, East versus West, empire versus resistance, hierarchy versus freedom, are not accidental. They are legacies. Reenactments of the celestial rivalry now fought through economies, ideologies, and digital networks. And the age-old question still lingers: who controls the Earth? To understand this long war, we must look beyond our present moment, even beyond written history, and examine what our ancestors built. The monuments they left behind are not accidental acts of grandeur. The pyramids of Giza, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, the geoglyphs of the Andes, these structures are not in accordance with earthly needs, but with celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, the journey, Orion's belt, Sirius, the Pleiades. Why would ancient peoples, supposedly primitive, stare so obsessively at the stars? Because the stars weren't symbols. They were coordinates. direction signs, memories of the sky gods who came before, and the promised return. These alignments are not random. They are messages, signs left by civilizations that knew that the war in the heavens would one day return to Earth. But in order to read these signs, we must first remember why we were created. We were not born by chance. According to the old tables, we were designed, created to serve, to benefit, to obey. But something shifted. We became more conscious, willful, capable of rebellion, insight, transformation. And now we stand at the abyss of rediscovering our true origins. So we must ask ourselves the forbidden questions. Who created us? Why were we created? And under what conditions were we bound? Because only by lifting the veil of our forgotten past can we reclaim our future. Only by confronting the truth can we rise to meet what is coming. We must awaken not only to their presence, but to our purpose. And with that awakening comes a duty to fight, not with weapons, but with knowledge, not for domination, but for freedom, truth, and enlightenment. For the return of the gods is not a story of the past. It is the trajectory of our future. And yet, one final mystery remains. When they return, who will lead them? This question has been asked many times. Zacharias Sitchin, a scholar who has dedicated his life to translating forgotten records of the Anunnaki. His answer was never rooted in data or certainty, but in fear. Because the real issue is not whether they will return. It is who returns in command. Enki, the benefactor of humanity, the scientist, the rebel who gave people knowledge and compassion, or Enlil, the stern ruler, the executioner of divine law, the one who considered humanity expendable? The implications are huge, but not as simple as good versus evil. In ancient cultures such as Sumer, Akkad, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome, gods were not depicted as purely benevolent or malevolent. They embodied complex archetypes, capable of creation and destruction, justice and wrath. It was not the gods themselves who were good or evil. It was humanity that judged their actions and applied moral labels. In Persia, Zoroastrianism crystallized this duality into its theology. Ahura Mazda as the force of light and order, Ahriman as the principle of chaos and darkness. This binary later influenced Abrahamic view of divine and demonic forces. Within the Anunnaki narrative, Enki and Enlil fall into the same trap of moral polarization. But in reality, neither was a pure savior or a tyrant. Enki defied counsel to give life to humanity and protect it from extinction. He often pushed boundaries in the name of compassion and knowledge. Yet when Enlil sought to wipe out humanity, he acted not out of hatred but out of a desire to enforce cosmic order and divine law. He was an enforcer of stability, balance, control. These are not caricatures of good and evil, but forces with competing visions for Earth and its inhabitants. Understanding them requires nuance, for the return of the gods may not be a conflict between light and darkness, but between order and freedom, between evolution and preservation. Whether Nibiru is a physical world or a cosmic metaphor, its role in this story is undeniable. Something is coming, be it a planet, fleet, or an age. But the real impact will not be a vessel. It will be a voice. When contact is restored, who will speak for the gods? Will it be one of Enki's heirs, carrying the torch of liberation? Or one of Enlil's, carrying the chains of obedience? The answer to that question will determine the path of our species. And it's coming soon. And when they do, everything we are, everything we believe in, and everything we hope to become will change forever. Spectacular theory. It's a story that feels, in its own way, just as epic and powerful as the ancient myths it seeks to reinterpret. The line between them is where you stand now. It's a line blurred by the mists of time, by the ambiguity of language, and by our own profound need for answers. Historians still debate the very nature of myth itself. Is it a primitive science, a social charter, a psychological drama, or all of the above? The persistence of the Anunnaki story, in both its ancient and modern forms, suggests that it touches something deep within us. A quirky tidbit for you. When 19th century explorers like Austin Henry Layard began excavating the Great Mounds of northern Iraq, they were often guided by the Bible, looking for the lost city of Nineveh. When they found the ruins and the vast library of Ashurbanipal, they were stunned to find versions of biblical stories, like the flood, that were far older than the Bible itself. They went looking for confirmation of their own history and ended up discovering a civilization that was, to them, as alien and remote as any creature from outer space. You look up from the dusty plains of ancient Iraq, up into the deep blackness of the night sky. The same stars that the Sumerian priests charted are wheeling overhead. The planets, the celestial manifestations of the gods, continue their silent, patient dance. Does a 12th planet, a Planet 9, a Nibiru drift in the frozen darkness out there? Maybe. Science is looking. But whether it is a dead, frozen rock or the home of our creators remains a question suspended in the vast, silent space between fact and faith, between history and a really good story. The truth, like those tablets, is still buried deep, waiting for the right light to be read. And so our long night in Mesopotamia comes to a close. The tale is told, the clay is dry, and the stars have wheeled across the sky. The figures of Enlil and Enki, of Sitchin and the silent scribes, begin to recede, fading back into the quiet realm of thought from whence they came. Let the grand, sweeping narratives dissolve, leaving only the soft and gentle hum of the present moment, the quiet comfort of your own bed, the gentle weight of your blanket. There are no cosmic questions to answer now, no ancient conspiracies to unravel, only the simple, easy rhythm of your own breathing, a slow and steady tide pulling you toward the shores of sleep. The mysteries of the universe, the secrets of the stars, can wait for another day. For tonight, all that matters is this peaceful darkness, this sense of calm, this gentle letting go. Allow your thoughts to drift away like grains of desert sand in a soft night breeze, leaving behind only stillness, only peace, only the deep and profound promise of a good and restful sleep. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and see you again in the next stories.